We have a first and second. Any discussion on this? Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Okay, section C of the meeting, we have the adoption of the minutes, and these are the minutes from the last meeting on November 26th. We have a mover and a seconder. Any discussion or questions about the minutes? All right, anyone opposed passing them? Great, and that passes unanimously. Director Hillian, you wanted to make a quick comment?
Thank you, Chair. This technically is business arising from the minutes, but it's also a matter of personal privilege. At the last meeting in relation to the transportation issue, I made some comments that created an inference that City of Courtenay staff perhaps had some undue influence on the way that directors from the city voted, and it led to some comments that, in my view, were disrespectful to the city staff, and it was inappropriate of me to create that inference. And as a result, and upon reflection, I would like to make an unqualified apology to the staff of the City of Courtenay, and will assure that I conduct myself in a more appropriate way in future. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Director Hillian. Okay, moving on, there's no other business arising from the minutes. Moving on to petitions and delegations. We have a late delegation request from Andrew Rice, Sean Vincent, and Rick Fisher. They're requesting to appear as a late delegation to present information to the CVRD around the Housing Corporation proposal. And this delegation was received on December 5th. In accordance with Procedure Bylaw number 1, delegations that have applied after the deadline may be granted to speak with a 2/3 affirmative vote of the board. Is there such a motion on the table? Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Anyone opposed? Motion carries. And I invite Mr. Rice, Vincent, and Fisher to come to the mic, and you can just turn that on, and I'll turn the mic on for you. And you'll have 10 minutes and then time for Q&A.
That one work? Everybody's happy with that? And Director Kerr, do I address you as the chair? Is that right?
Director is fine.
Director, thank you very much for having me today. Thank you for having us as a late delegation. My name is Andrew Rice. I represent Build Comox Valley. Just for the record, today, when I was put this delegation in, I didn't know if I was going to be available or not. So I put in the names of the three of us, Andrew Rice, Sean Vincent, Rick Fisher. If we are able to remove Rick Fisher's name from the minutes, that'd be fantastic. Not the agenda, but the minutes would be fantastic. Build Comox Valley. We're an organization of people that work in the housing industry in some way, shape, or form. We currently have over 40 active members and growing that include builders, developers, tradespeople, civil work contractors, and their employees and families. We are here to voice just concerns on the process. Not only the change of the bylaw 850, the emergency shelter bylaw, but also the alternative approval process that you propose to pass today on the item and the items included in the motion. I'll circle back to that in a minute. We also believe that there is a housing crisis in the Comox Valley. You know, working in the housing industry, we see these challenges every day with our employees and people around town and things like that as well. We're here to help maybe offer some solutions to this stuff at some point in time too. We do, again, recognize that you guys putting a housing corporation together is a solution that you guys have come up with. You know, we believe the best contribution that the CVRD could play in a housing is to come up with solutions that are less restrictive in zoning, planning, providing services and infrastructure for the housing needs as a whole. Ultimately, that is what your mandate is, to provide all this stuff for us so that we can carry on and do the things that we need to do to provide that housing. Over the last 10 years, there have been considerable restrictions to the potential supply of housing, including the regional growth strategy, official review plans of not only the CVRD, but some of the municipalities that some of you represent here as well. And so much of the need of infrastructure to support some of these things has actually led to be behind from what we actually need for the future, what we actually need for growth today. I do understand, again, just small things. I understand that, you know, some of the restrictions we're finding right now is some of the infrastructure we put in here recently is not adequate to service the stuff that we need today that was just put in a few years ago. You know, many of the developers and builders and people that I represent have brought forward considerable plans and proposals to increase supply of housing wherever there were non-market housing, freehold, or both. You know, as far as the alternative approval process, we understand that you guys need to take action sooner rather than later. You know, but the way you're going about this change to this bylaw and the alternative approval process is very interesting. Essentially, instead of proposing a plan that will go to consultation and letting the public decide with a referendum, we're planning that here within the doors tonight, possibly a motion to increase property taxes, to create a housing corporation without a business plan, without working out the particulars, and without doing any research on or where or what you'll be building housing on. You know, this alternative approval process, the only way for the public to provide any opposing against a plan like this is for over 6,000 people to provide letters of opposition. That's a heck of a lot of letters of opposition. I know this has been done in some places today, but it's hard to get 6,000 people to do anything, let alone provide opposition to this. Based on the calculations you gave for bylaw 150 and the increases of 5.5 cents per thousand of assessed value, this could cost the average single family home of $850,000, $4,750 additional to their property taxes alone. And that doesn't even include the transportation bylaw. You know, I'm not here to bash people or to bash what's going on. I'm here to say, hey, you know, us as the building industry, we want to help you guys find solutions. And, you know, some of the questions that we do have is that, you know, what does a housing corporation like this look like? And where would you guys build this housing? What would that look like? What is the zoning and planning for that? Who's paying for the DCC charges? Who's paying for this? And where does the funding all come from? And yes, it's all great and fine and dandy. We can get this from people's tax money in here this first 3 years to build a kitty for this. But what's going to happen to building costs and to the cost of construction as a whole during that time? And we don't really have a plan. I'm just here to ask you, if you can, to put the brakes in the alternative approval process for this stuff tonight. You know, we have been watching and kind of following along. We tried to rally up the best we could just to provide some sort of conversation about this stuff. And this is where we are here today. We know Christmas is coming up and you guys want to take action sooner rather than later, but here I am just voicing my opinion. That is all. Any questions for anybody?
Great, thank you, Mr. Rice. Question, Dr. Arbor.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, thanks, Mr. Rice, for coming and for your peers as well. And I'm really glad to hear, you know, some feedback on these proposals. We haven't had, at least at the elected level, a lot of feedback from the building industry on what we've been working on the last 2 years in regards to the housing corporation. And I think there's probably some gaps to fill in terms of how, from my perspective, it might look like the current proposal, which I've so far supported. And I agree with you that I think the last number of years there's been efforts to the housing crisis is deep and we have to do multiple things. And I think some of the things you listed we're working at, like the increasing the speed of building permits. We saw some moves at the province around density. So there's a lot happening. And what I would say is, I remember getting elected in 2018 and there was a sense that there were no rentals being built in the valley. There was like, it felt like the industry was not thriving. And there's been a ton of building the last few years. And that's good. And I'll give the credit to the industry, but also, you know, some of those OCP updates that allow for higher density have been good as well in Corny and elsewhere. And when you talk about infrastructure, I'm into massive infrastructure project to facilitate the development of new housing in the South area. So, you know, a lot of what you talked about, I agree with. The Housing Corp is another tool, and in this one, there's 2 existing services, which I'm sure you're aware of, but I'm repeating in case people watch. And we've mostly used them to fund nonprofit societies to date. Okay, so we've done a number of projects with them, whether it's the Watchier, whether it's Habitat. Like there's been a lot of different nonprofits in the valley supported at low level, you know, to spearhead them. But what we're hearing from them in terms of non-market housing, they're at capacity. We've heard that for some time, that if we want to build an additional 200 or 300 units a year for affordable housing that are non-market, they just don't have that capacity. Their mission is not to build housing, is to service the population that they service. So we heard from BC Housing and from others, including the CRD, and that's one example of the CRD Housing Corporation that I looked at and the board looked at around trying to create a vehicle that will allow us to partner with the private sector to take out housing that may be subpar right now, but could be preserved for low income. So slowly to build something that preserves an affordable housing stock. And I think you're right, the business plan, all that is not super advanced, but the bylaws we're looking to pass would continue us on that path towards building that vehicle. So that's why I've supported it, but I also understand your constraints. There's still a lot of questions this board has asked itself around it. So I understand that. I'll pass it back to the chair. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Yeah, appreciate it.
Director Brown.
Thanks, Chair, Vice Chair. I'm trying to understand your perspective. Is Build Comox Valley a nonprofit? Are you in the business of building affordable housing or?
You know, that's a good question. And that's something that we are trying to identify ourselves maybe a little bit before coming here tonight. There has to be some conversation about some of this stuff. And there are builders and developers and tradespeople. And we all have to we find that we have to stick together. We find right now that there are a lot of challenges that we're facing in building, planning, zoning, and things like that. And so we decided to come together as a group to support each other and also to see if we can be part of solutions too, because there's a lot of people that we have at the table here, and we can release those names further as time goes on because this group is building here all the time. And again, we're not necessarily an opposition group. We're here to say, hey, what can we do to help and what are some of these solutions? We are definitely not, we're not a not-for-profit. We're just a group of concerned citizens, concerned taxpayers, maybe that's the right thing to say.
In the building sector.
In the building sector.
Okay.
Yep, and many various forms and many various people of us have just come together with similar concerns.
Yeah. We had a very interesting panel at the Vancouver Island Economic Alliance Summit this year, which was a panel of builders doing just what you did, that suggested changes in municipalities to further build. And I just want to take a moment to share what the Village of Cumberland has done. So we've basically renovated our entire building department. We got funding through the province to modernize our planning and development services work. And we've done a lot in that area. We are also updating our OCP to allow for higher density. We're also voluntarily entering the 4 units per lot. But what we're not getting, despite 70% growth in the last census or so, is affordable housing. Our housing costs have gone up by 54% while we've built an enormous amount of housing in our village. So it's just not working to get us the housing we want. And the building sector that's not your mandate to build affordable housing. You're for-profit companies, and that's why you're good at building housing as it stands. But what we really need is affordable housing, and the mechanisms to do that are varied, as you say. So using the private sector for sure, but also using all the tools in the toolbox to do as much building as we can.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely agree with that. Supply and demand, we find always comes into this stuff too. And during the COVID crisis, we found, I'm in the real estate business. So we found that people that were saving hundreds of thousands of dollars for their down payment for $1 million condo realized they didn't have to be in Vancouver anymore. And so these people were coming here. And, I grew up and born and raised here in the Comox Valley. And my last real estate transaction personally, I sold a reasonable single family home for $489,000. And now that same home today is worth $850,000. And that was the last place that I sold back at that time. But that's only from 2015 to today. And we're talking 10 years, huge gain in that last 10 years. But, supply is the biggest issue that we're finding. And yes, we couldn't imagine what was going on with the COVID crisis of people coming over here. But yet at the same time, supply was lacking then. And what were we doing to increase supply at that time? And market housing, what is market housing? What is market value for market housing on market housing? It's what the buyer is willing to pay and what the seller is willing to sell it for. With all the extra costs with developments and lots and taxes and the different levels of things there too. And then you still got to sell it to make sure it's market price. That's what increases the value of homes. And that's what's created the housing crisis as a whole. Some of that stuff and some of those items there.
I think what's created the housing crisis is the lack of investment by higher levels of government in building actual social housing. That's what created it. And then now there is an additional demand for sure. Yeah, I just think we need all the tools in the toolbox, but thanks so much
Fair
for
enough.
being
And-
here.
And you just something else to add to that too, just so you guys know. You know, so it came out in the newspaper the other day that the living wage for somebody in the Comox Valley to live in the Comox Valley is $50 per hour per family. That means that both parties need to make at least $25 per hour, or one person needs to make $50 an hour, which worked out is over $100,000 a year. And that's not even including saving a down payment for a house. And that is attached to the thing of housing very much so. Now, with that being said too, you know, so I'm a realtor. I had a tough year last year. This is me being honest. You know, I made over $100,000 last year. My wife was under maternity leave, things like, we almost didn't make it. We almost didn't make it. And this is me contributing to the best things that I possibly can. And you take a look, and my rent or my mortgage that I pay is $1,800 a month. And it costs us a few extra things, but we don't have any recreation, we don't have any fun. We don't spend money on anything. We don't finance anything. So how is somebody that's paying $1,800 a month for affordable rentals, how is that affordable? And how is that allow them to grow too? And that's a problem that we have to talk about here as well. Yeah, all good conversation. Rick, sorry, you want to say something
I
quick?
think
Yeah, now let's excuse
Mr.
ourselves.
Fisher, did you want to add yourself back to the minute?
If I could, yeah, I didn't actually know I was on the agenda. I didn't even, wasn't actually gonna come, and then I had a cancellation. All I wanted to say was that, you know, the city of Courtney, or the town of Courtney, Comox, actually has thousands of affordable units in town. We do. We have apartments that were built in the 70s and the 80s, the 90s. These buildings are paid for. The people that own them have become the greatest beneficiary of bureaucracy that we'll ever see in our lifetime. When 10 years ago, building housing started to become so onerous and so long and so painful to try to get permits through and all the approvals. On top of that, the federal government started to add on item after item after item that added hundreds and hundreds of man hours of labor on each building. It created a shortage that allowed $800 a month apartments to go up to $1,800 a month. If we had kept up, if we had said in Comox, for instance, in the last 5 years, yeah, go ahead and build one building, because I don't think Comox built one apartment building since 2020. Those other units would have been a little bit cheaper. But in a supply and demand economy, if you put your foot on the scale and stop supply, demand is going to drive the price up. And that's what's happened. It's too late now. A lot of these catching up now is going to be tough. But I got to tell you, I build apartment buildings. And the reason I got into building them was because myself and my apartment partners knew that rents were going to go up as soon as construction became a 3 to 5 year process to get a permit. And it is. This summer, I've got a little building I built in Courtney. 700 or 500 units all came on at once. Courtney actually, about 2 years ago or a year ago, suddenly approved all these buildings. Rents have fallen 10% in Courtney right now. High Street on Aspen is advertising 2-bedroom units, $200 a month cheaper than 4 months ago. Supply and demand actually caused housing to get a little bit more affordable. What I was trying to get at, and I wrote an email to you guys, is if you put your thumb on the scale, or I mean, the word I used was stick a fork in the spokes, and make building such a horrible process, you're going to cause a housing crisis. And you did. So what I'm saying is if you can review those processes, realize that when you hold up a building for 5 years, you're not hurting a developer, you're hurting the people that are going to live in the building. The problem will get better. It'll take 10 years. I'm not against the housing corporation. I think it's great. Anything that adds units will help. I understand how the financing works. $5 million, I don't think you'll get more than maybe 20 or 25 units built. 5 years from now, if that's what you put all your hopes on, things are going to be a lot worse. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. I see the lights lighting up like a Christmas tree here, so I'm going to go over to Director Grieve.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chair. Full disclosure, I used to work for Rick. You know, and I got to know all the builders, and they're 99% great guys, hard workers, well, 95%.
Present company excluded.
But, you know, for the most part, they're just trying to make a living and trying to, you know, build what they can build within the constraints of all the regulatory framework that we live under. And we can't take full responsibility for a lot of these regulations. As you probably know, the province is a big piece of it. And, you know, the valley is not alone in this issue. It's right through the pretty much the entire Western civilization right now. So, I think it's important that we do take a look at, partnering up with the industry, and I think that that's what has been missing. I remember back. Courtney had, I think Jay Ottoson was spearheading it at one time about how to streamline the building process, how to get it moving faster, and we have worked with our building department to try to get things sped up. But the issue is the capacity issue. It's a labor issue, like everything else. There's a certain set of people with the skills to do it, and they're in great demand. So I think this is a great opportunity by you guys coming here right now, that we're going to be embarking on this journey of our own for the Housing Corporation. But that's, like you say, a drop in the bucket. I do think that perhaps what needs to happen in the new year is we all put our heads together and bring in the builders, bring in the investors, and see if we can brainstorm some ideas that'll move the needle a little bit. Because let's face it, we're not. Materials expensive, labor shortage. My son works in the trades now, and if you get all the employees to come in 5 days a week, you're really lucky. Oh geez, I can't come in today. It's Friday. I take the day off or whatever. So there's all those challenges as well, labor challenges. Money, we really don't know what we're looking at down the road right now, with geopolitical issue being what it is with the Americans and everything. We may be really having to pull together on this to keep this thing from going into the ditch. But my idea, I think we should maybe explore, would be to revisit a concept of roundtable discussions, and with all the players at the table, and come up with some. There's probably very little low hanging fruit anymore, but come up with something that will, at least over and apart from our little pet project here with the Housing Corporation. What can we do? We've got new regulation from the province now. We don't want densification, but of course, with densification comes stress on our infrastructure. So all of a sudden, the sewer pipe isn't big enough. The water main won't handle it. We're talking about that, I think, at the meeting yesterday. So, it's a multifaceted problem. It's going to take everybody's concerted effort to come up with something that'll make it a little bit better. I don't believe in quick fixes or easy solutions. They don't exist. But it's when you say, we're at a point right now where you talk about affordable housing. That's an oxymoron, just in the term itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Grief. Director Morin.
Great, thanks, Vice Chair. Thanks for the presentation. I guess the concept of this is really fluid. There's lots of different housing authorities they're very diverse, and I think the implementation of this is really around finding something that's tailored to this community, and following our housing needs assessment, which we've already done in terms of coming up with the idea to focus in on below market housing, which is not traditionally what you folks have been working on unless it's in a partnership. And that's also part of the concept as well. And we know there have been some developers in town who have been partnering with nonprofits, and it's very exciting to go to, opening of housing for, women who have fled violence, and know that there's a phenomenal local developer who has partnered in that work. Or, Macola Housing and Wachier and Habitat. And I know that many developers do that amazing work and contribute a lot to in various ways. And I think the vision is to find a way to create more of those partnerships, and also to really move the dial. I understand what you're saying about cost and how many units can we really get with, the money that we, start with, but we're hoping that it will leverage other money and other partnerships. And we're continuing to push the higher government to provide more, because as we know, as Director Brown mentioned, there hasn't been a lot of social housing built. And this is the housing for the people who have lower income jobs, but are making us coffee, looking after our aging parents, working, in those lower paid jobs or even middle paying jobs that can't afford. So it's really looking at the below market housing that we're focusing on. So I guess my question, having said all that, is, I heard Rick say not opposed to a corporation per se. This is all kind of in the embryonic stage, I guess. So I guess I'm curious what the organization, specifically what the reason is to be opposed to it, because I didn't hear that in your presentation, what the specific reason is to be opposed to this idea, having heard what I said.
So I met Mr. Rice about half an hour ago for the first time.
We've
met
many
before.
times, but.
I didn't come here because of an organization. I I went to a council meeting in Comox and I listened to a presentation where they were gonna do this housing corporation. And at first I thought, well, that's not gonna solve the problem. And I complained to Daniel Arbor about it. I hope that's the right way to address it. And then I thought to myself, well, it's not gonna hurt. So why be, it isn't that it's not gonna solve the problem. It's also not gonna make the problem worse unless it's the only thing that you do. And if that's the only thing you do, then rents are gonna go up another, $400 or $500 a month in the next 5 years. And the people that own the apartment buildings are gonna make more money. And if that's the plan, then just tell me, that's fine, we'll do that. My point is that the reason we have a housing crisis is because the $800-900 apartments ran into such a shortage of housing that the owners of those buildings hit the jackpot. People that own 300-400 units are making another $1,000 a month per unit because of a housing crisis caused by a lack of supply. And that lack of supply in the Comox Valley was worse than places like Langford or Nanaimo. And so if it's going to be an idea that's going to solve the problem, it's going to have to mean changing the way we approach the relationship between the development community and the city. Because right now, I can tell you as a lumberyard, I own lumberyards, got into housing because I could see the shortage. The relationship between the city and the development community is not one of trust. There's not a lot of trust there. And when they have these meetings that Edwin, sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to use your first name in these meetings, but that Edwin talked about, we used to work together. So the councilors don't show up, it's city staff. And then the message goes from city staff back to council. The message is what it is. But the reality is, it takes a long time to get anything built here, and it costs a lot more than it should. I'm building a $16 million building in Langford right now. It took me 10 weeks to get a development permit. If I did that in Courtney, which I did, a little building in Courtney, it took almost 2 years to get the same development permit. That's the problem. The housing corporation is great. The social housing is needed. Affordable housing is needed. But it's not going to solve the problem because you're not going to build 300 units a year. I know what it takes to build 300 units a year because I've seen other people do it. I can't do it. You're not going to be able to do it. You could do a building or two a year. The solution has to come from the private sector. I built 6 buildings in the last 5 years. I only built one in the Comox Valley because it's too difficult. So we built 2 in Qualicum Beach, 2 in Parksville, 1 in Langford, 1 in Campbell River, and 1 in Courtney. The Courtney one was the hardest one to get approved. And I don't plan on building another one in Courtney because of it. Now, if something changes, I will. And I know it makes everybody angry. The point is, I don't care because I'm not planning on building another one. But the problem isn't, the problem here is we allowed all the $800 units to go up to $1,800. And the guy that owns 50 of them is making another $50,000 a month because of the shortage. To expect somebody, when I build a new 2-bedroom unit, the cost is about $1,950 a month. You rent it for 22, 23, that's how much you make. To expect a brand new unit to get rented for $1,200 makes no sense when you created a situation that a 30-year-old unit gets rented for $1,800. And that's what I'm trying to say is that we had all the affordable housing, we squandered it. So you can try to get it back by building more units. I couldn't believe how fast rents dropped this summer. when all those apartments came on. Seymour, Newport, the little one I did, the one at the bridge, they all hit the market at the same time. Rent dropped 10%. And I remember thinking that was easy. That's just supply and demand. But we fought for that for 10 years. And so when I heard the corporation idea, it actually made me a little angry because I was like, oh, this is so frustrating to hear them come up with ideas that, and then I realized it's not going to hurt. It's going to help. I just don't think it's going to do enough. So anyway.
Fair enough. Part of the reason why I came here, the main reason why I came here was this alternative approval process. And that's one of the reasons why I'm kind of showing some voice here. I don't believe this is the right way to go about this. And I think we can bring more attention and more stuff to the public regarding this issue and get more approvals that way than we can by kind of, and again, don't get this the wrong way, but this could pass here tonight. Nobody would know any different. Nobody would know anything until January. And people might be a little upset knowing that their property taxes went up $50 for something they had no consultation with and no discussion with ahead of time. I know I'm taking up lots of time here. Ken, did you have another, Ken Grant, did you have another question?
My colleague from Comox has been very patient, so I'll go to him next. Councillor Director Grant.
Well, I just wanted to note that CMHC has come up with some really good financing packages, and rumors are that they're going to get even better. And I think it could be a game changer in how new apartments get built and the amount of affordable housing that we can get from that. But you have to really understand the CMHC policies to understand how this works. And it actually is going to bring on a minimum of 10% every building, which is a pretty big number. And if it goes beyond that, which I've heard rumors that it will, then it could be a real game changer in how this works. And Rick might know a little more than I do on that, but.
Yeah, I don't mind commenting on the CMHC aspect, but I just want to say, and I'm not very good at this because I don't sugarcoat stuff, but CMHC for 4 years promoted the idea of micro units. And when you talk about women leaving dangerous situations, a micro unit's fine. 3-4 months, small unit, $1,140 a month is the affordable rate. Who wouldn't want that? So CMHC promoted it. They wanted the development community to build it. I'm quite involved with CMHC. Then what they did was they said, okay, from now on, 10% of all the units you rent have to be affordable. The logical thing would be to build 10% of your units as these micro units so that you don't lose money, because if you lose money, CMHC won't fund the building. So you're caught. So everyone wraps their head around, okay, we're going to put 10% of the units as these micro units. We're going to rent them for $1,140 a month. And Courtney responded by banning micro units. And I was flabbergasted. I remember thinking, okay, well, that makes sense. CMHC is changing their rules. They're going to have more and more affordable housing. And the way they're doing that is they're lowering the interest rate to developers today, right now. If we get an apartment on a mortgage on an apartment is about 3.5%. You can't get that on a house.
Can't do that, right?
The federal government funds it through an insurance company that says to the bank, there's no risk to you. The new rate is going to be down around 3.2, and they're going to do that by cutting out the banks. In order to get that rate, you're going to have to provide more affordable housing. And some people are talking up to 25%. There's a builder from Courtney who's going to do an apartment in Campbell River, and he's offering CMHC 25% affordable housing because CMHC is offering him a financing package that makes it work. The problem where we run into here is in the valley is, well, for one, banning the most affordable units was counterproductive, but also in Comox, for instance, they'll say they want 10% of the value of the building in cash or something like that. And if I got that wrong, I apologize. So when you've got the feds saying you have to do this, you have to give up 10% of the building as affordable, they know that you can still do it. But once a town steps in with their own affordable housing policies and they don't understand what the builder's up against, the building dies. The project fails because if the building isn't going to be profitable, you won't get the money. And it's very easy. The margins in these things are thin for the first few years. So as far as CMHC goes, Ken's absolutely right. There's a new program coming out right now. I asked for a copy from the broker we use. I'll have it next week. It's complicated. It requires putting a proposal forward to CMHC on how much affordable housing you're going to offer. But it would be great if the towns took the time, the counselors took the time to understand all the rules. And then the rules you put in place won't contradict what the builders already have to do because CMHC is not flexible. They're not going to negotiate with you. They don't care. Anyway.
Great suggestion. Any other first-time speakers? I see Director Arbor has another comment. Okay, we'll go to Director Arbor.
Yeah, this is, I find it a very enriching conversation, and I did want to touch on the two last elements, if you don't mind. I think it's an important conversation, but on the AAP process, you probably noted that we're actually contemplating 4 AAPs tonight, not just one. And in regards to public interest, I actually sent an email to the record today to start covering us again. Because over the last number of months, we've had very little coverage at the CVRD of our meetings. We used to have excellent coverage, and now we're not really getting covered by the local paper. And I think you're right, heads up to the public. I think, as I said, this is on the continuity when we started on this journey 2 years ago on this kind of housing corporation idea. But you're right, that's going to hit the floor in January. And there's one AAP that I really care about, which is the Union Bay Fire Hall. And I told the community, if it doesn't go forward, we'll go to referendum right after. And I am also conscious that across the island, there's been a bit of a push against that tool, just generally speaking. So I just want to acknowledge that you spoke about that. But my last comment was really the reason why I'll probably be supportive today, again, as I have, is even last week I was talking to the Denman Housing Association, and they have a dire need of a project there. And they have the land, and they're on their 5th denial or something like that. Maybe I'm exaggerating. It might be the 4th, but might be the 5th denial from BC Housing. And partly it's because they're volunteers. They don't have that expertise. And I keep thinking to myself, if I had a staff in the housing business, right, that's helping those kinds of projects and assisting them, that would make the world of difference today. Because when I talked to them, their last decline was about 2 weeks ago. They're about to toss the towel, but they have the land and they have a great project. So for me, that's where kind of I end up leaning on.
Let me just say, it would be nice to see the council and some of the members, as Edwin pointed out, of the development community, create a relationship based on some trust. It's pretty easy to realize someone lied to you and discount their opinion from then on, but most of them won't. I haven't come here to say anything dishonest. Anything I say you can check, but I really do think this is a solvable problem, but it isn't solvable unless the people involved all look at it and say, okay, I guess I'll have to give a little on this or a little on that. But so far we don't have that. There's a lot of tension in that industry. And I'm in the middle. I'm the building supply guy who knows all the developers, the city people, and I see it. And I think this isn't really very healthy.
Great, well, great discussion. Thanks so much, Mr. Rice, Mr. Fisher, and Mr. Vincent as well. And thank you for all the housing and homes that you provided as well in the community and giving people a roof over their head. I heard some themes of working together, strengthening relationships. Mr. Rice saying, we want to help. I really appreciate you saying that. And Mr. Fisher, thanks for your support for the Housing Corporation. That's nice to hear publicly as well. And great engagement that we had around this AEP discussion that we'll be having later. So thanks to each of you. We're going to be going on to the next parts of our agenda, but you're welcome to stay. Yep. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. And thanks to the directors for your questions. Excellent discussion. Okay, moving on to reports. We have a BC Transit project update. Could I have a motion for receiving that report? The seconder? Perfect. And over to CIO Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Seth Wright, Senior Manager of Government Relations with BC Transit, is here to present again. Seth, thank you for attending, and I think this is a regular update you're wanting to present to the board around project service performance and whatnot. So building that relationship. So Seth, I'll turn it over to you, and then board will probably have some questions for you. So.
Thank you so much, Chair Kerr and CAO Warren. I really appreciate the time to present to you today. And in conversation with staff several months ago, we decided that more regular updates from BC Transit directly might be helpful going forward and being able to provide a little more light on what work we're doing in collaboration with your staff. Today, we have effectively 3 topics I'm going to cover to talk about, which is the first one being system performance, and how the Comox Valley Transit System is doing, at least the fixed route portion especially, which is doing exceedingly well. The second piece is provide a short update on how we're progressing with the Transit Exchange project, which is a project nearly $10 million to improve key exchanges throughout the Comox Valley. And finally, a bit of update on some planning priorities that were identified a few years ago in the Transit Future Action Plan, which you adopted and approved. And I'll just close off with one slide to touch on the battery electric bus project that we're progressing across BC Transit and across the province. In terms of performance for the Comox Valley transit system, Comox Valley performs really well for a community of its size. And here I have some numbers that provide a bit of a lens of how it performs compared to what we call peer communities or tier 2 communities. Tier 2 communities are communities that serve communities in the range of sort of 50 to 150,000 people. And so when we look at Comox Valley in terms of service hours, and I would note that the performance last year was impacted adversely by the strike. And so despite the strike, despite the lack of service for a couple of months, there was still better than tier average or peer performance. So we see the overall service hours is a bit stronger in the Comox Valley than the tier 2 average of 26,000. The operating cost recovery was only incrementally higher, but basically just under 20%. So fare boxes account for about 20% of total operating costs of the system. Passenger trips carried significantly more than peer systems. That is something to really celebrate. And the total revenue brought in through the fare box and modestly through advertising revenue was higher than its peer systems as well. When we look at route level ridership, we see that the Route 1 is exceedingly carries the overwhelming majority of people across the system. The Route 1 is the route that travels from the Comox Mall to North Island College, through downtown Courtenay and down South Courtenay to Enfield Center. That travels along the corridor where all the new housing that's being built in the Comox Valley is being located. So that is very logical, and that's what we see in a lot of communities in Campbell River. We see the Route 1, which is their corridor along Dogwood, where they're putting all their housing, has a similar sort of outlook. In the Comox Valley, perhaps the secondary and tertiary routes are a little bit lower down. It's pretty sharp difference there. So what I then put up on the next slide is a comparison of how the Route 1 does in comparison to the other routes. But instead of looking at total ridership, it's rides per hour. So as a portion of investment, you can see that the Route 1 still performs exceedingly well. But suddenly you see a route called the Route 99, which provides a lot of school ridership and college ridership. And it does extremely well as well. But you can see the other routes across the valley also provide good ridership on an hourly investment basis. I've provided a bus stop activity chart. This chart provides a good understanding of sort of ridership across communities, but it has a major caveat in that it particularly impacts the 3 electoral areas within the Comox Valley Regional District, which is that it only accounts for dedicated stops. So in the electoral areas, we have a lot of stops that are not formally dedicated stops and are flag stops, and bus drivers will stop by request. Unfortunately, the way our data is collated, that does not capture it in this data. So this data is reasonably accurate and completely accurate for the municipalities, but the electoral areas are underrepresented in this data, with perhaps the exception of Strathcona electoral area D, which might seem funny, but we do have 2 dedicated stops up there to connect people north-south with that connection to Campbell River. So that represents those folks that are traveling between Comox Valley and Campbell River. Looking at Handy Dart ridership, we see similar trends to what we see on the conventional side, that Comox Valley outperforms its peer systems. We can see that the service hour investment from the Comox Valley Regional District is significantly higher than peer systems. We see operating cost recovery is nearly double what we see in peer systems. We see that we carry more people in the year, and passenger revenue as a result is quite a bit higher than peer systems. In terms of the Transit Exchange project update, you're hopefully very familiar with this project. We are working on detailed design currently for the 5 exchanges into transit priority measures identified in this project. We are currently working with design consultants, engineers to design the bus bays, to look at the wider sidewalks, to locate a nicer, brand new, larger shelters in these exchanges. And moving forward quite effectively over the last several months and into the new year. In the new year, we've really been queuing up public engagement. So we'll be reaching out to businesses and members of the public in the vicinity of these key exchange locations to have conversations and invite them into a conversation about how any considerations we need to be marking as part of this project. The engagement is going to be over the next couple of months in early 2025, and then we'll be proceeding to award a contract for construction in short order there. Finally, I wanted to touch on the Transit Future Action Plan service investigation priorities that were identified in the 2022 Transit Future Action Plan. The first one, and the one where we have had some good traction in recent months, was back in September. We were able to introduce the extension of the Route 10 as part of the Comox Valley transit system that extended and connected to the Route 99 down in Bowser up to Deep Bay. And that connection is the first part. It's really effectively a local connection. It doesn't provide the sort of interregional convenience. It is not a trip that most of us would enjoy as a way to spend your day. It's a lot of connections, and it's not the most direct. So we have identified that we would like to continue working towards a better interregional connection that can provide good service between Comox Valley and Nanaimo, as identified in the Transit Future Action Plan. We have this in our work plan for 2025 with our planner, and we'll be looking at whether it makes more sense to put on the Old Island corridor or travel via the highway, and that will be a conversation that we'll have to have with the Regional District of Nanaimo, as I assume there'll be a desire to cost share with them in developing that service. And we're also having ongoing conversations with, I have the ministry name slightly wrong. It was perhaps when I developed this presentation, the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, but it's since been rebranded as the Ministry of Transportation and Transit. So we are having conversations with them about bus stops on highways and related topics to support this work. The feasibility of service on Denman and Hornby Islands was identified, and I understand that you've contracted Watt to do some work in this regard. I've provided a bit of context on the slide in terms of what we have on other Gulf Islands. On Salt Spring Island, we have an entire standalone transit system. On Texade Island, we have one route that's part of the Coffit Regional District transit system that travels over 1 or 2 days a week to Texade Island and provides a limited amount of service. We don't have this type of system where we have dedicated buses that provide a sort of satellite service. And in socializing this possibility with my colleagues and across other teams at BC Transit, there's a number of concerns that have been raised from an operational perspective. Increasingly, we as a Crown Corporation have raised our operational standards and our expectations. And these are sort of in alignment with safety and operating standards for expecting a good customer service. And these have presented challenges in small and rural communities in being able to meet these standards and expectations. And so we've flagged some of these concerns, and this is some work that we can continue to look at, but I've identified and provided a link to the Southern Gulf Islands Service Discussion document, which sort of identifies a bit of a trajectory from a grassroots community-run model of transit to the ultimate evolution of a BC Transit model, and details that in pretty good granularity, and might be a valuable for considering what the ramifications and feasibility and cost implications would be for moving to a BC Transit model. I wanted to highlight a little bit about transit and busing. There's discussion in the Transit Future Action Plan of finding synergies and opportunities for optimization. And what I really wanted to highlight in terms of school buses versus transit buses is that they have different purposes, and they're both respectively optimized for their unique purpose. And so school buses are an incredibly cost-effective tool to carry large volumes of students at peak times, and they provide good value for doing that. Transit buses provide service to a diverse community that are ideally densely populated throughout a community, throughout the day and throughout a longer period. Transit tends to be higher on operating costs to be able to deliver that level of peak service that we see with school. And while we do provide a lot of school service, to carry every student in an entire school district on transit buses would significantly increase your transit costs. And finally, on-demand transit is something that's touched on in the report. We do have some slight variances of on-demand already in the Comox Valley. And this on-demand project is looking at the extension of or implementation of a technological app to supplement and ultimately provide a better dispatch solution to be able to put the buses in where people are requesting them. We introduced this in the Crawford neighborhood of Kelowna not too long ago. We're seeing about 2 average boardings per hour. So we're seeing very relatively low ridership, but a really extremely high level of satisfaction. So this works in areas where there's low density. You're willing to make that investment, but I would caution that the cost is not only commensurate with the operation of what we currently have, but it's slightly higher because you're adding technology to the existing service. We're looking at that scale of efficiency cost in the long run might come down, but currently the cost of operating on demand is slightly higher than operating a flex route in a low density neighborhood. And the last slide I have here is about our battery electric bus program. There was a fairly significant announcement made earlier this week about the battery electric bus program across BC Transit. And we have a number of communities identified here where we are introducing battery electric buses in the next year and a half or so. Nanaimo is one of those communities. We're going to be bringing in 10 battery electric buses into Nanaimo. Comox Valley is not currently on that list for phase 1, but might be under consideration for future phases. But one of the key pieces we need to do is move forward with a new operations and maintenance facility, which is some work that some of my colleagues are doing in the background. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thanks so much again for the opportunity to present.
Great, thanks, Seth. These reports are really great. So I'll go to Director Arbor first.
Yeah, it's almost become an annual that this is always a meeting where I talk too much, but this is all my favorite topics. So thank you for your work around the interregional transit, and I think you were really well calibrated in how you talked about it and the potential as well. And I know there's quite a lot of excitement in the communities even for that local connection. And I'm really glad you'll pursue it next year. And I know the colleagues at RDN are similarly enthused. And my vision remains the same. Like if we have 5 runs a day and it's a single bus rather than each person having their own bus, it's almost if it was Campbell River to Nanaimo, one segment and the bus comes back and you have a few of those so that it's smooth. You don't lose time on transfer. I could see it work, but you mentioned the big highway as well, so I'll be really curious to see what you come back with. But I may put out a motion to VICC actually this year for building the interregional transit on Vancouver Island now that it is connected. So you'll probably see that just as an advocacy point for us if it gets through this board. And Hornby Denman, thank you for those comments and thank you for the efforts on the feasibility. If you can't see yourself in the space, which I'm not too surprised as BC Transit, I would ask if you would be willing to be an in-kind partner. And by that, I mean, there is some unfairness that not only Hornby Denman, but the way you describe it, all these remote communities are not well suited to the BC Transit model, but we miss out on the 50% match of the province to operate those systems. So, on Hornby, we're putting 150,000 and we have no line of sight on funding. So if BC Transit were telling the government, hey, listen, we can't really serve these things, but maybe the government should consider matching as we are subsidized, because I know that the communities there would work miracle and it would make a huge difference to their sustainability long-term. And wow, I think that's it. I'm super happy and I'm really glad that the number 1 is working that well. I think Mike Sparsky reported close to 1 million rides in the Comox Valley last year or something like that. So, I mean, where the strategy we put in place 8 years ago is working. Like people are riding that core and it extends from there like any transit system in the world. So overall, I'm really pleased with the development. Thank you.
Director Grant?
Thanks. I'm not sure if you're ready to answer this, but I'm just wondering on your on-demand buses, how would that actually work? Would you have extra buses sitting around and I buzz in and you show up 5 minutes later and away I go? Is that, I can't get my head around the plan. That's,
Sure, and through the chair, of course. On demand works not significantly dissimilarly to some of our existing services, but the big change is that we have an app, and so I've downloaded it to my phone. It's the on-demand app right now. It only works for Kelowna, but as we move towards phase 2, which is expanding it to more communities, Comox Valley is on that list for communities that we'd be looking at, and it's to provide better service in those electoral areas that we're currently servicing with current sort of variants of on-demand service. But you would request a bus, and a bus would come typically within 15 minutes to half an hour of requesting it, and it would take you to another location that would probably connect to a bigger route. It probably wouldn't take you all the way from Black Creek into downtown Courtenay, because that wouldn't make sense, but it would take you to Black Creek to the highway, that sort of thing, and provide that functionality. Certainly that is, and it would probably be within a dedicated time, similar to, or perhaps we would tie it with some expansion to be able to enhance that window of opportunity for people in that residence, and perhaps they would have 4 hours on this day a week and 4 hours on that day a week to be able to have that service to get to meet their requirements and tie into that conventional service. We would look at the schedule and make sure it made sense for that.
Director McCollum?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the presentation and joining us tonight. There's a lot of interesting information here for us to chew on. I was a little mixed, or I wasn't clear on, you had 2 annual summary slides that show some data around ridership and cost recovery and fees. I wasn't clear from the labeling. It was slide number 3 for Route 1 and then the other slide for all the other routes, or what was the different one? It was like slide 3 and slide 7. It basically the same table, similar title, just what's the difference there?
Yeah, and through the chair, I apologize, this wasn't more clear. We have terms at BC Transit that are based on what the legislation says, that are potentially confusing, and the terms we use are conventional, which is your fixed route transit, which is what the service that's in the rider's guide. And the other piece is what we call custom transit, which is the handy dart service.
Okay, I thought that might be a potential answer. And then so the conventional service, which that actually does make sense, so that is what we think of as conventional. One curiosity I had about these figures is that our passenger trips are on average 40% higher than other services, but the operational recovery is pretty close to the same, like a rounding error, 1% difference. And is that just attributed to the fact that most of the service is not really funded through that recovery piece? Or like, how are those 2 things so different in the comparators?
Yeah, and again, through the chair to Director McCollum, the difference is attributable to a number of factors, but one of the main ones is the higher operating cost. So we have different operating contracts in different systems. The Comox Valley operating contract is one that has been updated more recently in terms of the actual costs. We've been through a period of hyperinflation in the last couple of years, and that cost is reflected in and demonstrated in that difference ultimately. So ridership is higher, but operating costs are also a little bit higher.
Oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. And then in terms of the new bus facility, when is the next point in that process in terms of decision making as far as the board's perspective on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Well, I am very keen to come back to you with a bit more of a presentation on where we're at with that. We have been working, my colleagues have been working with lawyers and talking with the lawyers of a property that we would like to procure. And that conversation is still ongoing. There's some T's that need to be crossed and some I's that need to be dotted on that. But when we are at a point when we can report back, we will come to you. I would hope that would be in the next 3 to 6 months.
Great, thanks.
Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair. Just curious if it's on your radar that we have a significant number of international students in the community, hundreds of them. Those numbers are going to be cut substantially by the federal government's decision. I believe it's going to create challenges for our service industry in terms of employment. But I'm wondering to what extent it might dent our ridership, given that virtually all of those students would be bus riders. Is that on your radar, Tom?
Certainly, it's a great question, and it's something that I've considered and that we've talked about with staff. We haven't been able to do any projections because we don't have very good data on demographics of our ridership. Obviously, there's very stringent privacy regulation legislation in the province of BC that limits how you can collect data and how you can utilize that data. So we do have sort of self-selected data where we collect from our users that volunteer themselves. That tends not to include a representative sample of the demographics you're talking about of international students. So we don't have good data on this. We're starting to get some good data from our UMO electronic fare program, and we've just started to dig into that. I personally just sort of started to dive into that data in the last couple of days. And that's provided some interesting sort of information on sort of where students are versus where the general population is. But we don't have that detailed sense, certainly, around international students. What I do look to with some hope and positivity and warmth and enthusiasm is the fact that North Island College is working at building residences, I think currently underway at the Courtney campus. And so I think that provides a good opportunity to offset that potential reduction in the student population. And also from a transit perspective, provide some of that off-peak ridership, because those people will want to get into downtown Courtney to do their shopping and get their groceries and things like that. And they won't be going at the busiest times of day to the college when the bus is already full. So that'll be helpful.
Thanks a lot.
And one last question from, there's another question. I'll go last. Sorry, Director Morin.
Yeah, I mean, the bus number one, obviously, like you say, is on that route of density. And that's also the more, what's the word I'm looking for? It has more shorter time. What's the name of that? The rapid transit, or what's it called when it's running more often?
Frequent.
Yeah, frequent. Yeah, thank you. I couldn't remember the terminology for it. Are there any other routes that have the potential of number one? Because obviously we're building lots of density in different locations. So I'm just wondering if in future plans, if there's another route that could look like number one, that could potentially get to that level.
Thank you for the question. It's a great question. I'm not a transit planner. I used to be a transit planner, and before that I was a land use planner for a local government. So this is definitely a topic that's close to my heart, but not something that I think about constantly anymore. I think that the success of the Route 1 is the value of the density corridor that it's on, and it's an existing density corridor. It hits all those popular destinations, the colleges, the schools, the
Right.
malls, the commercial centers of the downtowns. And it would be hard to replicate that on any other route in the Comox Valley,
Right.
because between downtown Comox, downtown Courtney, the college, and the shopping mall in South Courtney, you're hitting everything, and nothing else is going to quite compete with that. Everything else feeds into that, and often routes like the Route 2 from Cumberland feed into the Route 1. So people traveling to downtown Courtney will take the 2. And then the one. I think perhaps in the long run we might see some of those some of those other Courtney routes grow in ridership, but they ultimately will always cover a lower density neighborhood area. And while we see perhaps some density increases outside of the Route 1 corridor, most of the density in the Comox Valley is going on that Route 1 corridor, and that makes the most sense and is great and what we want to see in a community to put that corridor. I think that's sort of the direction that the province was thinking of when they undertook Bill 47.
Okay, sorry, just a quick follow-up. Yeah, I mean, I hear that for sure. I just wonder if, like, when I think in terms of young people getting to jobs and things like that, they're not all necessarily living in those dense areas, but there may be, and Cumberland will like me for this, but there may be opportunities for, you know, young people in Cumberland to, if there was a more frequent, you know, schedule. So I guess those are some of the things that I'm thinking about, but I'm sure that transit is all over covering those trends and that kind of thing. I just know from working with youth for many years that that was a big concern. And during the strike, I ended up actually driving a young woman home from her job at Superstore. She lived way up Lake Trail, and she was used to taking the bus, and she was going to walk that entire way. So I think there's lots of people like that person. So anyway, thanks.
Might add one more comment about that is that we've been really drilling into the data and doing a lot of work at looking at what makes the most sense. And so hopefully I have the opportunity to come back and present some positive news on the outcome of the future expansion. And in conversation with staff, we've looked at whether it makes the most sense. I think for this upcoming year, we've identified the Route 2 and the Route 5 and potentially the Route 20 as a secondary to the Route 2 as priorities for expansion. And so I think those are routes that really present some opportunity for improvements in frequency. The frequent transit corridor is like 15 minutes or better. And the whole idea of that is this logic that you don't even need a rider's guide. It's so frequent that you can just walk out to the bus stop and catch a bus. I think we're not going to be able to achieve that level of service on these other routes, but we can certainly work towards supporting a Folsom transit system that works together and provides some level of reasonable frequency so people can get to where they need to go at the reasonable level of reliability.
And possibly the last question, Seth, just on-demand transit. Is the thinking behind that to have it open to all residents, or is it really targeted at certain populations, like those with accessibility needs or mobility issues that that have no other option?
Yeah, thank you. The intention is not particularly narrow demographic related to accessibility, although that's something that we have seen and do consider part of the broader envelope or demographic that we'd like to appeal to. What we've seen both in Kelowna and I would say in Powell River, where the city of Powell River has undertaken its own on-demand pilot, branded as the Zunga bus. In both of those communities, the demographic tends to skew towards younger students, especially in the K-12 bracket that tend to be using it a lot. And perhaps that's a byproduct of the technology that it's associated with, and also the access to transportation options. But and perhaps the demographic of those communities. But as we move forward with on-demand, we'll be monitoring a little more closely and doing some surveying to identify what the demographic user group is and how that represents or perhaps doesn't represent the broader population in that community.
Great, thank you. Perfect. All right, great discussion. We have a motion for receipt on the table. Anyone opposed to receipt? Okay, motion carries. We next have a transit fare review. Could I have a motion for this report? Receipt. Perfect. First and second. And again, to CIO Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mike Zabarski, our Manager of Transit and Facilities, is here to introduce the staff report and then I believe introduce our guest on this topic as well. Mike, where do you?
Thanks, James, through the chair to the committee. So yes, we have another BC Transit special guest today. Very lucky. So brief staff report ahead of you here to introduce our next speaker. Fare reviews are something that BC Transit undertakes usually on a few years basis. We haven't had one in several years because of the pandemic. There was a freeze on fare increases during that time. So BC Transit has now started up a fare review, the first since 2019. There's some preliminary analysis and a bit of an overview of the process attached to the staff report. We'll be coming back to the board in the spring with a more comprehensive report. But we thought we'd take this opportunity to just kind of introduce the process and some of the initial analysis and get a bit of feedback from the board. So with that, I'll pass it over to Tessa Stewart, the Manager of Business Development with BC Transit, and we'll both be here for questions after.
Great, thank you. Can everybody hear me? Okay, just to make sure.
Yes, we can hear you, Tessa. Thank you.
Great. And am I able to share my screen? I'll just try to share my presentation.
Yes, that'd be great.
Okay. There we go.
Perfect. It's up on the screen now, Tessa. You can go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So yeah, I'm happy to be here today to kind of introduce the fare review process, go through a bit of background and just considerations, and kind of summarize the different things we'd be considering when we look at a fare review. Oops, 1 second. There we go. So just quickly, a fare review background. Essentially, the purpose of the fare review is to evaluate fare strategy on a regular basis, ideally, to account for increases in operational costs due to inflation and investments. The objective with our fare review will be to produce fares that align with BC Transit's recommended fare strategy. The fares will maximize revenue, attract and retain ridership, and consider affordability as well. And as Mike mentioned, there is the BC Transit signed the Safe Restart Agreement. It's one of the reasons why we have had a delay in starting this fare review process, and won't be something that will hinder us moving forward, as it does expire April 1st, 2025. So just a quick snapshot of our current fare structure. I've also included in here our fare strategy guidelines that we use when we're assessing fares and fare products. All of the fare products in the Comox Valley Transit System do align with our fare strategy recommendations. And then we have our pricing guidelines listed here. There are 2 products that do kind of sit outside our recommended pricing guidelines. So the concession 30-day pass does have a larger discount than we would recommend, as currently the pass is priced at the adult 30-day pass less 37%. And then the semester pass is just slightly outside of our recommendation as well. So when we look at potential fare changes with the fare review and different options we may bring forward in our ultimate recommendation, we are always trying to align fare pricing and products with our fare strategy guidelines as much as possible. A quick snapshot of fare review history to see kind of previous changes that may have been looked at. So we did have the full UMO transition this year, and with that, there was the removal of that physical ticket product. In 2020, we went to the day pass on board system. So that was a system that replaced the transfer policy that you previously had. There was also extending the semester pass eligibility to high school students and align the Handy Dart monthly pass fare with conventional monthly pass fare. And I should have noted as well that the previous fare structure does apply to Handy Dart products as well, and fares outside of the day pass, which is and the semester pass, which are not available on Handy Dart custom transit. In 2018, there was quite a few changes made to the fare structure and fare pricing. There was also the introduction of the family travel program, which doesn't so much apply anymore now that we have free transit for 12 and under. And then there's a school group transit pass. So the senior and youth discounted cash fare and the discounted tickets were eliminated during this fare review. So a universal fare was established. There was also the adult pass increased from $52 to $55. And then the rates were aligned amongst the senior, youth, and post-secondary pass fares, all to $35. Continuing, there was more changes with the semester pass decreased from $135 to $115, and then the senior, youth, post-secondary dual pass rates were all aligned as well to $40. So for most of the products there, they were decreased with the one increase for the youth pass. And then the semester dual pass was decreased from $150 to $130. And that dual pass is what allows you transit on Comox Valley Transit and Campbell River Transit. In 2014, there was also some changes made to the adult cash fare and the senior youth cash fare, as they were both increased. I provided a bit of a snapshot of some similarly sized transit systems for some comparison. I will note that Cowichan Valley recently approved a fare change, so they will have their fares increasing as of next year. Nanaimo is also currently looking at, so the fares listed here will be changing next year. They're going up to $250 for their adult cash fare. And then Nanaimo is looking at potential fare changes in January and potentially approving a fare increase as well, although that is pending. Victoria recently approved a fare change, so this $3 rate goes into effect April next year as well. And we do expect Campbell River and Chilliwack to follow this year and start their own fare reviews and potentially increase their fares as well. So most systems have been waiting to do a fare review with COVID, so now they're looking to adjust. I also include St. Albert and Cornwall, Ontario here. Generally speaking, the fares in BC Transit are lower than we see across similar transit systems across Canada. So I often include that as comparison. Quick snapshot of fare product usage in the system. So you can see that the single ride products, so that would be cash or using UMO cash balance, is the highest sales in your transit system. Then we have the 30-day concession pass, and concession is new terminology for student and senior discounted passes. We use that in UMO, and 30 days passes now replace the monthly passes. In UMO, we also see the semester pass having large sales, and then the 30-day adult pass, and then small sales from our dual passes. When we're looking at potential fare product sale or increases to fare pricing, we generally consider what the impacts would be based on usage, and we take that into account. A snapshot of cost recovery and analysis to looking at total operating costs and total revenue and cost recovery over time. I include this just to outline that, operating costs have continued to go up. Revenue has generally stayed a bit stagnant. Of course, there was a decrease with COVID and we've seen it rebound, and cost recovery has declined over time. So from prior to COVID, we have seen the cost of recovery come down. It's just below 20% now. So hoping that with potential fare increases, we may look to improve cost recovery, as we know that operating costs will continue to increase over time. Some other considerations with a fare review, we would look at prepaid fare programs and potentially introducing these in the transit system. So one program is called ProPass. It's a professional pass. It's essentially an annual program that organizations can enroll in, and it offers employees discounted transit. So it's one way to incentivize people to pre-purchase their transit usage. Generally, when someone's purchased their transit ahead of time, they'll use transit more. It kind of secures that revenue. And we ask people to commit to a year to get that 15% discount, which is what we recommend. So we would bring that forward in the fare review as a potential program to introduce. We also have a program called EcoPass. It's something that we utilize in Victoria for developments. So it may not be something that is utilized as much in some of the smaller regions, but in Victoria, when developers are looking for their variances for parking, so they're looking to reduce how many parking spots they have, they're asked to invest in car shares or bike storage. And one thing that they can look at is EcoPass, which is essentially offering transit usage to occupants of their new development to encourage them to try transit instead of a single occupancy vehicle. And that's something we can also look to introduce. With both of these programs, because of UMO, we are actually able to take on the administration centrally at BC Transit and manage that. So it's a lot easier to introduce new programs without having to require kind of local municipal staff manage the administration of these programs, which may not be feasible for everyone's workload. And BC Transit can support now with UMO. We also always include that UPass as a consideration, although as far as we are aware, North Island College has not indicated interest in currently approving it, but is something that BC Transit is always able to support in those conversations if there is interest in introducing a UPass. A couple other considerations that have been brought forward is something we would like to include in the fare review would be fare-free transit for youth. So there is the existing program that the province helps subsidize, which offers fare-free transit for 12 and under, and this would be extending that in your system for 13 to 19-year-olds, and what the potential revenue loss would be for those that are currently purchasing fare products and would no longer purchase fare products. As Seth outlined, it is difficult to know exact demographics of fare product usage, but we would do a general kind of estimate on what that revenue loss may be, and if that's something you wanted to consider pursuing moving forward. We can also look at providing a review of what existing programs exist across BC Transit systems to kind of offer discounted transit products. These would be programs that support vulnerable populations that may need more support in accessing BC Transit products. And we see success with different programs and can include an overview of what those programs are as you look to potentially introduce your own discounted transit product programs in your system. So potential fare changes, as mentioned, we would look at, any fare options we develop. We would look to align them with recommended fare guidelines that BC Transit has. We would look at comparable transit systems, and we would look to balance affordability while maximizing revenue with any fare increases that we may bring forward to recommend. We would include the estimated impacts that any fare options would have on revenue and ridership. And we base all these estimates on kind of standard transit elasticity models, looking at fare product usage elasticity and how that might impact the ridership. Generally speaking, with fare increases, there may be a slight decrease in ridership, and we include all of those estimates in any sort of options we would ultimately bring forward in our final report. We would also look at fare changes and for the dual pass, and just noting that any potential changes, if they were approved by the board, that they would also have to have subsequent approval from the City of Campbell River, as it is a shared revenue fare product. And really just looking, at the end of this my presentation, if there's any guidance or direction on potential fare changes and where you think they should go, that's helpful for me and as I work with staff on potential options. And just to kind of end the presentation, a quick timeline of where we look to go. So we're providing potential options for review and endorsement with staff and working on what those may be, and then bringing forward that final fare review in spring for approval, and then having a fall winter this year fare change implemented. Any questions or comments? We'll just stop sharing.
Thanks, Tessa. Really appreciate that. And I'll go first to Director Arbor.
Thanks, Chair. And thanks for the presentation. I guess my only thing that I would like maybe to see back when you come back, oh, sorry, where are you? There you are. Okay. It would be in 2018, 2019, the board had a pretty extensive set of conversations around free transit. And it just came to my attention that there is a jurisdiction in Ontario that has kind of Orangeville or Orangina or something like that. Not Orangina, probably Orangeville. Probably the chair would know because he's from Ontario.
Orangeville.
Orangeville.
It's Orangeville. Apparently they have implemented free transit, and I've seen a jump in 45% in ridership. I think my numbers are approximate, but I saw that news clip not that long ago. So if you would be able to bring back, if you have any knowledge of those experiments and whether I know they're not recommended, so there must be reasons why BC Transit's not looking at it, but revenue is still quite low in relation to our expenditures in terms of riders. And I know this board historically has really cared about ridership and growing our ridership and mode share. And if they are starting to be more substantive evidence of the impact, it'd be really fun for us to at least understand what the options are. And maybe my question is, are you aware of that experiment over there?
Yeah, through the chair, I'm not aware of this specific instance. I can certainly look into it. There have been studies done on fare-free transit in many, especially in Europe, there are different situations. Generally speaking, the research generally points to increasing transit ridership on service improvements and frequency and convenience as far as getting people to make that shift from getting out of their car. For most people who are driving a vehicle, cost is not the main reason that they're continuing to drive the car, it's convenience. So to get them out of the vehicle, it's really improving transit service, which generally costs more. So which is one of the reasons looking at, potentially increasing fares to help improve service can actually help get more people on the bus. But it's definitely something, I know we will be bringing forward considerations for fare-free transit for the youth population, but I can certainly include some information on other programs. And I would say that generally I would bring some information forward, and then it would be something that if it was wanting to look at it more in depth, it would be a separate kind of fulsome separate kind of investigation into potential options, but we could kind of broach it in the Fairview.
Thank you very much.
Director Brown?
Thank you. Yeah, this is really great information. Thanks so much. I'm curious about if you have any more information about the student union and why they're not all over this. That's confusing to me. And then I'm also I'm going to squeeze into, because the vice chair is not looking. Is the Pro Pass, or is one of these targeted towards lower income people? And do we have a mechanism for doing that?
Through the chair, so to your first question, my understanding is that there just generally hasn't been an appetite from the student body to approve a potential UPass program, as it would be something that every student would have to pay their fees for. And if the large student population is very dependent on their vehicle, especially if there's a large trades population that, drive, then it's really about getting that referendum passed, as they would have to vote and approve any UPass program that we bring forward. So that's my understanding, is that there hasn't been from the student body support to potentially pass that UPass. But we could certainly look at reconvening. That's just my understanding as of right now, is that there isn't an appetite from the student body in general to look at paying for fees when they wouldn't use transit, as the majority of them.
So potentially that when that housing is finished, that might help.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
might be yes, I agree. There's more people on campus that'd be looking for affordable options for transit. Yeah. And to your second point, sorry, and now that I've spoken, I'm blanking on the Pro Pass. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
So Pro Pass would be something that's employer facilitated, certainly offers more affordability because it has that 15% discount. It's not necessarily targeted towards any sort of vulnerable populations, but if organizations can bring it forward, it offers an immediate discount for employees. And we have seen success with organizations such as Island Health in your community. In Victoria, they actually further subsidize the pass by 75%. So they make it even more affordable for employees, and there are options for employers to provide a further subsidy. Generally speaking, though, I would say that if that is a focus, then there are other programs we could bring forward as models for you to look at, such as Kamloops has a program called CanPass, and it's an affordable transit program that they fund. There are requirements that individuals need to meet, and there is a fee that the individuals pay, but it's very, very heavily subsidized by the city itself. So there are different programs. In Victoria, we have something that it's a low-income transit association that they get a 2-for-1 like discounted products that BC Transit offers that discount, and then they actually work with supportive organizations themselves. I'm forgetting the name of it, but they support, so organizations apply to them to get these discounted products, and they give them out free of charge. So there are different models, and all of them would require funding, and that would come from the regional district if there was a desire to kind of introduce a new program. And we could definitely bring forward some options that kind of similar to any fare free transit would be kind of options to consider, and then potentially look into more in depth with staff about introducing a program.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's a quick question for me. I'm a huge fan of this fare-free transit for youth. So as I understand kind of the timelines in an analysis for us to discuss next time. So you, for example, we looked at that and said, yeah, we implement the fare-free transit for youth. What would the resultant daily fee or monthly pass fee be for other riders? And then would that affect the ridership numbers on the various routes? Is that kind of the process we would look at, like the trade-offs of doing that versus how it would affect others that are, if the fee went from $2 to $2.50 or something like that?
Yeah, through the chair. So the fare free for youth consideration is really separate from any fare price changes that we would look at. So we would bring forward, a section of our report would outline what the potential revenue impact would be, that essentially you would expect a decrease in revenue because all of a sudden this demographic was no longer buying fare products, but that would not factor into our ultimate fare options, it would kind of be a separate conversation. And then if the board decides that that's something you'd like to pursue, then that could be something that's actioned, and then BC Transit could work further, do some further investigation on that. But it would not be a part of the fare options that we ultimately bring forward in looking at how revenue and ridership impacts are with those fare options. We would not have the fare free for youth kind of in those fare options. They would reside separately. So it's kind of a separate approval process.
Okay, yeah, but the decision point would be at the same time in the spring.
So it could be, it's very much up to you if you decide that that revenue that I bring forward is something you'd like to pursue. We generally wouldn't include any recommendation but that would be something that if you decide to move forward and want to approve, you would have that kind of revenue analysis to factor into any potential change you want to make.
Okay, great. Any other questions around the table or online? Great. Thanks, Tessa. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion to receive this fare review report. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Next, we move to another transit topic, the Evolve Bike Share. Can I have a motion for receipt? Okay, we heard two movers, so we'll take them as a mover and a seconder. And again, this is on the Evolve Bike Share report. So I'll again over to CA Warren.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And Michael Zbarsky again will be introducing this topic and introducing another special guest that we have at the CVRD boardroom today. So Mike, over to you.
Thanks, James. Through the chair to the board. Yeah, we're just full of special guests today. So another quick staff report, and then we have a presentation to follow. So private automobile transportation is the largest source of greenhouse gases in the Comox Valley. It's also the second largest annual household expense. That's why it's very important, and we've included it in our regional growth strategy in a number of ways, including some mode share targets. The combined cycling and pedestrian mode share target of 20% by 2030 from a baseline of 9% in 2006. As of the 2021 census, we've basically made no dent in that, unfortunately. And so that kind of shines on the need to do some different things. And one of those different things is this electric bike share program. We've started the pilot just recently, and we have been partnering with BCAA and their Evolve program. And so we have David Holzer and Leanne Bueller here today to provide an update on where that program's at, and we'll all be here after to answer any questions. David?
Hello. Thank you for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be here. I think it was about a year ago I was here talking to you guys about trying to get this set up. So first off, we want to thank you for helping us get Evolve going here in the Comox Valley. Directing staff have been great to work with in getting this set up and helping support us. And so today I'm here to, Today I'm here to give you guys some results. So today we'll give you some high-level results of sort of some of the things we've done. We also did a survey of our riders, and we'll give you some information about what they said. And then we'll talk a little bit about sort of what our plans are for next year. So right off the top, when we put this together, we have been operating for 190 days. We launched just before the air show in May. And we've continued to operate. We're operating right now. Our bikes are out there in the public. Hopefully people are just chomping at the bit to use them in this cooler weather. We had 75 bikes deployed at its peak. We're a little bit lower at this point. And we saw just under 2,500 trips. So this was a great start. Our Highline report to you is that we're off to a great start. We had over 1,100 people use the service. And then what we see here is some pretty interesting numbers when it comes to trips. So 4.8 kilometers is the median distance, which is not short. This is quite a move, for quite a ride people are taking. And it's taking them about 25 to 26 minutes to do it. So these are great indicators for us. It shows it shows people are sort of warming up to adopting the program, and there's more stats to come. Moving through, when I came here like a year ago, I said, like, we really want to be this trusted mobility solution that addresses some of the transportation challenges that the Comox Valley has, and especially thinks about moving your mode shifts. So that's what we took that to heart. So when we launched, we really looked at destinations. And it was funny, we were listening to the transit and thinking about the one bus route. And I was like, we have a fair number of stations along there, but we do have some gaps to fill. So looking at that, looking at connecting neighborhoods, and we spent a lot of time with staff sort of finding appropriate locations. We also wanted to make sure people knew we existed. So we did a lot of PR, we did some radio, there was some news articles. We had a pretty massive reach, like 175,000 people, so, you know, which is more than who lives here. So they heard it a couple times, knew that we were out here. So we were pretty active in using BCAA's kind of larger marketing, not just putting our bikes on the road and letting them do the talking. One of the big ones was 15,000 kilometers was traveled on our bikes this year, which is huge. That's a lot of trips. And then when we started to look at where people are taking trips from, we had a nice mix between Courtenay and Comox. Comox actually punches a little bit above its weight. And we see a little bit more trips than the population size would generally say, but Mansfield Drive in Courtenay and Riverway and Courtenay along the pathway there are the two top locations by a fair margin. And then Peril Ellis Gallery, which is downtown, we took over a unused bus shelter, which has been great. So what did that mean when we talked to people in the survey results? We asked the question of, like, what would you have done if you didn't use our bikes? So half of them said that they would have taken a car trip. So we've reduced those car trips. And then we also asked, like, how does our program contribute to living in the CVRD? And 57% said it has improved the overall experience of living here. So we're pretty excited about all those results, I'll be honest. The other thing that we wanted to do was really focus on local riders. So when we came here, we talked about, you know, trying to be a local source. So we picked popular local destinations to serve. We launched and promoted monthly subscriptions to residents. And then we targeted most of our media and most of our advertising, especially our online social media stuff, to residents here. So what did that get us? A really great stat is 81% of the people who used Evolve used it more than once. So we're pretty excited about that. People definitely wanted to take another trip. In these early days, a lot of people's first trip isn't solving a transportation purpose. They just want to try it out, see what it's like, get used to it. And that's totally fine with us. So what we see is round trips. And so we saw quite a bit of round trips, especially in the first 3 months. But since then, we've seen that number kind of continue to slide lower and lower and lower. So people are now using it to get from one place to another. 55 people have purchased a monthly subscription. So considering we've only been here for 190 days, that's excellent for us. We are excited about that. It really shows that people are now thinking about relying on us. Monthly subscription, just so you guys are aware, it's $10 a month, and it drops the per minute rate to 10 cents a minute. So for someone to do it, they're usually looking to take a trip 5 or 6 times a month to, like, make it really kind of affordable for them. Yeah, and as I said, so 40% of our trips are one-way trips, and that number continues to increase. So well, that doesn't kind of match up with 50% replace the car. It's just mostly just the scale of the numbers over a year. When we asked people, did it add value to the overall transportation system here in the CVRD, 73% said yes. So really strong. Moving on, our other big promise was that we were going to build connections within the local community, that we were going to create authentic, like, relationships and be part of the CVRD. We took a lot of great steps towards that. We went to the air show. It was a great, actually a really tremendous start for us. We had a lot of use right out of the gate as people saw it as an easier way to avoid traffic and parking issues to get to the event. And we were also at Nautical Days. So those were two big events. Next year, we plan on kind of doubling down our efforts as we now have more certainty. We also engage with North Island College. So we now have a station there. It took us a few months, but we have a station at North Island College, and we've started working with their student community representatives to like do engagement, safety education. And then the other thing we did was we gave people incentives. So we gave people minutes to try our system out, so it didn't cost them any money. This has worked really well. Nearly 60% of the riders live in the CBRD. Our registration process asks for where you live, and we get this quite a bit. And I think it's about 18% more live on the island. And then Alberta is an interesting driver. We see some people from Alberta. We've distributed over 1,000 free minutes to community members, and our partnerships haven't just been with North Island College. We also started talking with the Comox Valley Cycling Coalition to talk to them about how we could help with safe riding courses and promoting it. We've set up a station at Crown Isle Resort as well. One group that's not on here is that we also engaged with the Comox Valley Airport, and we set up a station there, which has been really interesting. We were a little skeptical at first. Why would you ride a bike to the airport? But there's a lot of people that work there. There's a lot of different use cases. So we're excited. That station has started to really grow. Yeah. So the thing that we wanted to talk about is community impact. One of the things that micromobility does do is it makes it easier to get to parts of the city. And 43% of our users said they made a purchase after using our service. So at a local business. So this is something that we continue to track in all of our communities, is like, how much are we helping sort of get people to places where they can make purchases and be part of the community. Excuse me. Lastly, we said we would be safe and we would provide a safe service and that people would be safe on our bikes. We really took this one to heart. BCAA is a safety-driven organization for years, has been providing roadside assistance and driving and telling people how to drive safely in the world. And we take this to our bikes as well. So really what we do is with our local operator, we talk about a high-touch kind of approach to our system, and defining really strong and progressive KPIs is one of the biggest steps. So we look at how often they're touching the bikes, when they're touching the bikes, and ensuring that the bikes are safe to use. For safety education, we both use these events to talk about how to ride safely, as well as online channels where we'll talk about riding with helmet, how to ride safely through online sources. And then we optimize our fleet management as demand starts to become change, and we change with demand. So the outcomes from that are really strong. We've had a very, very low rate of theft and vandalism. I think we've only had 3 bikes vandalized in total. We've only had 16 of our bikes left outside of a parking station in the last year. So these are tremendous results. This is people treating the system really well, using the system in a really great way. Our operator here has done a tremendous job of ensuring our bikes are available. We're at 97%. So when someone comes to a station, they want to try our bikes, 97% of the time they are available. And given that most of our stations have 2 or 3 bikes at them, that means there's no bike not available. And lastly, we've had no major accidents, nothing, no police reports, no hospitalizations whatsoever. So, excuse me. Last thing is just sort of some of the survey results around safety. 85% of people were satisfied with the safety and operation of our bike and the features on our bikes. 84% of the users were satisfied with the availability. And then 91% of the users are satisfied with their cleanliness and the functionality of our bikes. So really strong, really, really high end, top end marks. If anything, the 84% on the availability is something that we'll address next year because we think that's a lot of people just not having a bike available where they are, a mismatch in supply and demand. So that's really all the big stats from our program. So it's really just to talk about 2025. So our hopes in 2025 are to continue to expand more stations in the Courtenay and Comox area. We've kind of highlighted a couple areas that we're kind of looking to target, and you'll see that on the map. And then also we are looking to expand up into Cumberland. It's something we heard when we were here a year ago that we should go to Cumberland. We now feel like we should go to Cumberland, so we're ready to up to Cumberland. The other thing that we promised that we would do is launch an inclusive mobility program. So this will be discounted rates for disadvantaged members of the community. We have been working pretty hard with a group out of SFU called MyTax, doing some research on how to effectively bring these programs to life and actually have impact. One of the things we'll work with staff with is sort of setting some goals and some benchmarks around what we can accomplish on this to try and bring these programs up. So that will happen here in 2025. And then the last thing is really to talk to you guys about something we would like you to consider. One of the things we're noticing industry-wide is the proliferation of e-scooters and how e-scooters are actually really driving mode shift. In cities such as Richmond, a recent report said they're 8 times more popular than the bikes that they have. In Coquitlam, it's 6. Industry-wide, it's 4 times more popular. So as a device that can really, it shows a lot more popularity, e-scooters is a device that really does drive stronger mode shift. So it's one of the things that we think the CVRD and both the cities of Comox and Courtenay should consider. The province has a e-scooter pilot. It's much easier to join now than it was before. Some changes in bylaw and road rules that you'll have to consider at each municipality, but it is something that we believe at Evolve could help really drive more adoption of these programs and drive the mode shift that targets that Mike was talking about earlier. And it's something that we'd love to hear from the board about sort of their thoughts and some of their concerns. From a safety perspective, the safety record continues to improve for e-scooters. There's a lot of different approaches to speed, no ride, slow ride zones. Helmets now are all equipped on all of the devices. And the devices themselves have gotten a lot safer. They've become more ready to be used for a public setting. We spent a lot of time researching our device that we use. It has a really the largest in the industry front tire and rear tire, so it can handle a lot of different surface types. It has a wide footboard that allows people to stand really comfortably and safely. And we also have turn signals on ours to help people actually indicate without having to leave their hand. So those are, I know safety is always the concern with this, so I thought I'd jump in front of it before I say thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it. And first we have Director Arbor again.
Oh, it's starting. I'm starting to stop. So yeah, bring the e-scooter at our next board meeting. Bring any scooter and directors who want to try it, because we've all tried a bike.
Yeah.
And it'd be kind of fun if in January you brought any scooter here and we could have a shot at it. And if you want to try next season, I don't know the bylaw stuff in the municipalities, but yeah, I'm definitely in favor. And I think that, and I see a lot of young people and older as well on these scooters, so it seems to work well. My light was on just because there's just a small grammar point in your presentation that I wanted to correct.
Okay.
So Cumberland is actually spelled Cumberlandandroyston. So it's Cumberland and Royston. And you can create some family strife because Cumberland is known as Royston of the Forest. And Royston sometimes is known as Cumberland of the Sea. And if you put bikes in one locale without putting at least 1 or 2 in Royston, like even Mayor Brown will have family issues So I would encourage you to consider, there's a lot of interest, a lot of cyclists in Royston. I think the Cycling Coalition would tell you that, and I think it'd be great if you could expand the scope and consider for this year adding a couple bikes there. Thank you. That's it, Chair.
Thank you, Director. Director McCollum.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. It's great to see this reported back and just, yeah, seeing where the successes are and maybe where there's some opportunities for improvement as well. I appreciated seeing the contrast between the types of trips and who's using them. I think that's like important for us to understand. I think the biggest opportunity that for me personally and likely the board in general sees is for our residents to see this as a viable way to get around on a regular basis. So, I mean, you mentioned the monthly pass that, you know, ideally that would be for someone using it up to 6 trips a month. You know, I would like to see this as a service that, or as a service that sees it delivering more than 6 trips a month to people. Like if we're really talking about mode share, mode shift, it needs to be available conveniently enough in enough places that people will opt to do it as maybe a number 1 or a number 2 option, and maybe not just like when they can't catch a bus or yeah, so, and just for context, 15,000 kilometers is awesome. But a regular bike user like myself, I do about 4,000 in a year. So if we can get people using this regularly, the opportunity for that number to go up is a lot. And so I guess my point on that is that would really like to see more stations in high density areas. I brought it up last year when we looked at this, like there's nothing south of that station that you pointed out on Mansfield. We have some huge apartment buildings at Walmart and that's a destination where people go for shopping. And there's a transit exchange in that zone. Likewise with the bottom of the superstore area. So would really love to see an emphasis on working with some private landowners to see if that's a service that they want to cooperate with you in a way that their residents might be able to, you know, yeah, benefit from what you're bringing to the community. And I'm just also going to weigh in on the e-scooter while I have the mic, even though I'm only supposed to say one thing. And I'm fairly lukewarm on e-scooters from the reading I've done. They tend to replace walking trips more than car trips. So in order for me to really have a lot of enthusiasm around that, because there are some real downsides in terms of people on sidewalks that they just, the users, that people that jump on scooters don't tend to necessarily have a lot of experience, and it's a novelty and it can really diminish how people enjoy walking. So I would want to see some data on that mode share piece before I was really excited about the idea of e-scooters. To me, it's more of a fun toy than something that's really gonna get people out of cars. So, but I am open to hearing more, but that's my my thoughts on that from what I understand right now. So
David, do you have any response to that?
Yeah, just so on the sort of 6 trips, that's kind of like the threshold that it's not how many trips the monthly users took. It's more kind of like the price threshold, but makes it affordable to spend $10 a month to get the discount. So please don't misjudge that sort of comment. I don't know how many of the trips those 55 people took, and I can get that information, but I assume it'll be more than 6 because that's kind of the break-even point if you were to make that purchase. On the e-scooters, you know, your comments are completely valid. There's a lot of data that shows that they're taking away from walking trips, but they're also actually increasing people's mobility. So what we're seeing is Conversely, you'll see stats that say, yeah, it replaced a trip that I might otherwise have walked, but asked whether they would have taken that trip. There is some stats that show that they wouldn't have taken it at all. So, I think we can look both ways around these issues, around that, and the safety concerns can be really addressed. The primary problem that scooters have presented is speed and how fast they're moving through the community, and how we regulate speed is something that we take very seriously. We regulate them down at 25 kilometers an hour, and we find that that is a really good spot where if they're riding past someone who's walking, it doesn't feel scary. And for the rider itself, because you have to always consider the rider a little bit in this, it's still an enjoyable, I'm moving through the community at a pace that I wouldn't, So we're happy to come back and give you guys more information about scooters. We just wanted to broach the topic tonight. So
David, if I could just add a follow-up question to the e-scooter question, or topic. Is the point would be to have them also at designated stations? And because we've seen in some communities, Vernon, where they're just strewn all over the sidewalks and they're left anywhere. So is it the same concept to have hubs that they are returned to?
absolutely, yeah. I think a hub-based system works really, really well for these devices, and for also for the bikes as well. Especially in the core parts of the city and the most populated or commercial areas, a hub system is probably the right way to go. As you try to expand it out to more residential areas and a little less density, that's where it can be a little bit different, because it does get a little harder to find places to dedicate space just for our bikes and scooters. And it's also not as convenient for the people that are trying to get to their home, let's say, to have to park it at a station that might be 500 meters away from where they live. So those types of considerations, you can do what they do in North Vancouver, which is a blended system where it's stationed in the most kind of highly dense and congested areas, and then free floating outside of it, where people can park their bikes like closer to their homes, right in front of their homes if they like. Or that is one option, but like, to be honest with you, it's probably best to just start with the station system and then think about that as your system grows.
Right. Thank you. Okay, on the theme of everyone wants to go to Cumberland, let's go to Director Brown next.
So obviously very happy to see the expansion to Cumberland next year, and just clarifying that any of the bikes that are in Cumberland are part of the same system, so they can go to and from and be left in one or left in the other, and that's all good, right? Awesome. Looking forward to that happening.
Yeah, I'll just add to that is one of the biggest considerations we had with Cumberland being at the top of the hill and the rest of the system being at the bottom of the hill is sort of watching how many people will take those trips back up the hill. We believe the e-bike makes that a lot easier. So we're hopeful that we will have some good equilibrium. One of the things we didn't talk about in the presentation is that our relocations, the amount of bikes we've had to move around in the system, is incredibly low. We only move 2 or 3 a day out of 75. So what we're seeing is really nice equilibrium of movement amongst our bikes. So Cumberland does represent this opportunity where bikes might just end up all downhill, and we'll spend a lot of time bringing them back up the hill.
And I'll just say I'm also interested in more information about the scooters.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Great. Any other questions? Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Have a motion for receipt on the table. Any further discussion? Anyone opposed to receipt? Motion passes. Okay, we're going to do one more topic before we take a break for dinner. So we have the Green Building Policy, Corporate Energy Emissions Plan and Implementation. Could I have a motion for receipt? And second? Perfect. And off to CAO Warren again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And Michael Bernard is our Corporate Climate Response Coordinator, and Michael's going to be presenting this report and available for questions to follow. So over to you.
Thanks. Through the CAO and chair to the board. So as mentioned, I'm here this evening to present the CBRD Green Building Policy for consideration. Oh, here's my thing. All right. The corporate energy and emissions plan advises that green building requirements be implemented for CBRD building projects. This will ensure a more sustainable and future-oriented approach that promotes occupant health and comfort, aligns with existing CBRD plans and policies, and while also ensuring that we meet our corporate emissions targets in the most economical way possible. So some of the goals of the policy are that CBRD buildings be designed with a focus on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, be resilient to climate change, incorporate life cycle costs to better understand the true cost of our building projects, and then also that we keep things as simple as possible while meeting these goals by encouraging a passive design approach rather than complex building systems that can sometimes be a little bit difficult to manage. So some key aspects of the policy are that no fossil fuel heating systems be installed in new CBRD buildings, which, given our low emissions electricity grid, results in significantly lower greenhouse gas emissions overall. The policy advises a passive design approach, which achieves a few things. It achieves simplicity in terms of building systems, as increasing passive performance requires no moving parts or complex HVAC systems, and generally the envelope lasts the lifetime of the building. And then it also decreases the size and cost of heating and cooling systems, and result in lower energy costs overall. And then lastly, a passive approach increases the resilience of buildings to climate change, as the buildings can operate with less power for longer periods of time, and are better able to be utilized as heating and cooling shelters if needed. And then the solar ready design component will reduce the future costs associated with adding renewables to a building while keeping initial construction costs low as necessary. So essentially taking advantage of the lower costs associated with implementing photovoltaics during construction while not forcing their installation at every site, thus sort of keeping our options open with less negative impacts on budget. And then installing EV charging infrastructure up front provides capacity for our growing electric fleet, and avoids future costs associated with trenching electrical lines for charging infrastructure down the road. So LEED, or Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, was selected as a design requirement for new buildings for a few reasons. CBRD is already familiar with LEED design. We have a commitment from the pre-existing sustainability strategy, and LEED's also referenced in our regional growth strategy. It's specifically recommended in the corporate energy and emissions plan. This building, as well as the new water treatment plant, were designed to meet LEED standards, though they're not certified. And similarly, the policy doesn't require certification, as it adds additional costs that doesn't actually really improve the building itself. LEED is also widely recognized and familiar to the building industry. It's the most common green building certification both in North America and across the globe. It's flexible, as it has various point categories that can suit different building use cases as needed. So a public facility, for instance, might have a greater focus on equity or access to transportation, whereas an office building might have a greater focus on energy performance or water conservation. And then it can also be adapted to the location that you're constructing the building. And then similarly, LEED is a holistic design system focusing on a broad range of building features as opposed to just energy and emissions. It incorporates occupant health and comfort, broader regional concerns like equity, access to transit and cycling infrastructure, water conservation, and other things. We've also included a specific requirement to, go back here, sorry. We've also included a specific requirement to achieve 1 point in the materials and resources category in the LEED point system. And this is achieved by performing a whole building life cycle assessment during the design to calculate the environmental impact of manufacturing and construction. we did this because we've heard some concerns from staff and the board around the significance of embodied carbon emissions from our building projects. And while the majority of emissions from a building are produced during its operation, the lower we drive operational emissions, the more significant embodied carbon emissions can become. But that being said, addressing embodied carbon emissions can be a bit challenging and potentially expensive, and we don't really know the true significance of embodied carbon for our projects until we start to measure it. So this requirement will allow us to begin to analyze the impact of embodied carbon emissions through that whole building life cycle assessment during the design phase. And then in the meantime, we can work with suppliers and designers to get a better understanding of market readiness, what options exist to address embodied emissions through material selection and design choices. So we've also included the life cycle cost analysis to help guide planning and design decisions. The goal is for staff and designers to understand the long-term impact of decisions rather than focusing exclusively on upfront costs. And this approach allows us to incorporate the CVRD internal cost of carbon to account for the societal costs associated with our emissions. And just generally speaking, we see this as a more financially sustainable approach that avoids sort of downloading costs of an asset onto future taxpayers and, you know, instead convert some of that upfront cost into future savings. So in terms of the impact on overall costs, we're well aware of the financial strains that the CVRD and taxpayers are facing. So we did everything we could to draft the policy in a way that would have minimal impact on capital costs while still achieving our most important climate goals. In terms of what we can expect, the impact on cost varies with each project. And we do anticipate some increases in design cost as we're asking for a higher degree of upfront analysis. But design costs are a relatively small portion of the cost to build and operate a building. And then by focusing on overall life cycle costs and keeping the policy as flexible as possible, the aim is to avoid significant construction cost increases while maximizing operational cost savings. And then as mentioned, including the internal cost of carbon in that, we also capture some of the societal costs associated with building emissions in that analysis, which are traditionally ignored but still incurred by the public. Studies have shown that construction cost increases range from close to 0 to 8%, but for green building projects. But due to our relatively mild climate and the flexible approach we've tried to go with, cost increases are likely to be on the lower end of that range. All right. And then operational savings, on the other hand, have been found to range from 6 to 35%. This varies considerably depending on design decisions, which is why we've included the life cycle cost analysis. The rule of thumb in the construction industry suggests that on average, the operation and maintenance of a building is around 5 times greater than the cost to construct it. So a small capital increase can result in significant savings over the lifetime of the building, and the recommended approach provides a more fulsome picture of those costs in advance. And then just in general, studies have found that green buildings cost less over the course of the entire life of the building, even when designed to very stringent design standards. And this policy will allow the CVRD to take advantage of that while still accommodating for current fiscal realities and inflation in the construction sector. Yeah, so I'm happy to answer any questions the board might have.
Thank you, Michael. Any questions? Dr. Grieve.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks, Mr. Chair. I read through and I agree with, the majority of the report, but I do have an issue with page 4 under the benefits last bulletin about restricting the use of natural gas by eliminating connections to the gas grid, by avoiding installation of those assets in our buildings, I just wonder if this is maybe an erroneous assumption that these grids will be forever pumping natural gas. And I did send out a little missive this morning to the board, but unfortunately it was linked to a proprietary hyperlink that didn't open up. But basically it was an article in the Economist magazine by Casey Hanmere, who is late of the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And it basically is talking about advances in systems that produce synthetic fuels. And it says that basically that solar power, as we know, is getting cheaper by 15 to 20% every year, which is, you know, pretty rapid. And synthetic fuels made by producing hydrogen from water through electrolysis, and reactors that combine it with existing carbon pulled from the atmosphere provide a closed loop, a net zero fuel that can be used to run existing technology. And when you take a look at the big picture, I mean, we have, this is a substitute for existing energy, transportation, industrial infrastructure that collectively worldwide is worth over $100 trillion. Rather than swapping everything out, I think that, you know, this has to be taken into consideration. It was brought up actually at a Vancouver Island Coastal Communities workshop in Victoria a couple of years ago, where we had BC Hydro and Fortis there together, talking about the future and the challenges BC Hydro is going to have in distribution of their grid. Just the very simple fact of obtaining right of ways and building up the grid is, I think, $38 billion worth of work in the future. But it seems to me that this is maybe a product of what you'd call early 21st century thinking, because really we're looking at quite a lot of technology innovation that's going to be coming down the pipe over the next 10 to 15 years. They estimate that synthetic fuels would be cheaper than fracking gas. So you got to talk to the market forces if you want things to happen. We're still in a state where we have vested interests. Because you follow the money, you have vested interests right now in hydrocarbons that some people are piling into lithium. And over the last couple of months, you see they're piling out of lithium. So, I mean, it is what it is. If you can produce a product that's cheaper than the other product, and it's a closed loop system, and it saves you all that technology that's already in existence. I mean, I think, you know, we have to look forward a little bit beyond, you know, where our minds have been over the last 10 years and look to the next 15 years. So I just think that should be eliminated. I don't like those phrases. I mean, I certainly don't see them. If you're building something, you don't necessarily have to hook up and run on the existing gas grid, but those days are numbered. That's my point. So I will be supporting this except for that one clause.
Thank you, Director Grieve. We have Director Harbour.
No, thanks. I'll be supporting it with the clause. And if Dr. Grieve's interested, there's been the high drama in the city of Vancouver the last 3 months around natural gas. And what's really interesting there is staff ended up doing a lot of analysis looking at the costs of building natural gas into projects versus electrical. And they had everybody, like they ended up, I think, with 150 submissions from all sectors and BC Hydro, and everybody ended up contributing. And it was noted there was no concern around impacts on the electric grid. So I know that's often a repeated thing that we hear from certain segment of the political spectrum. And second, they also said that natural gas was actually a cheaper option over the course of a project for residents who live there. And so that's before mentioning the climate benefit and trying to reach our target around emissions. So I think a lot of the research has caught up. around some of these issues, and I realize it will remain controversial, but I think there's yeah, this, as our own staff report says, the recommended option will keep us on track towards our greenhouse gas emissions target. And to me, that's important. And I think it's important to our residents. Thanks.
Michael, did you have a comment?
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair to the board, I just wanted to address Director Greaves' comments and just note that the policy itself does not speak to the tie-ins to the grid. It's more to do with the equipment that we're installing in the facilities. So basically, it would just require that for construction projects moving forward, we do not install fossil fuel specific heating equipment in our buildings. It wouldn't have anything to do with grid obsolescence. That's the policy itself. So even if there were maybe points in the staff report that you didn't agree with, the policy does not, I don't think, refer to those things specifically. But yeah, maybe that, hopefully that clarifies it a little bit.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. I'll go back to Director Grieve.
No, not to rebut that, but I do think that we have to be ever vigilant of emerging technologies. I think, we can see right now that we're even behind the times with our thinking. It's moving so fast. And anything that could save what I see is a throwaway society with a green paint job. We're talking about heat pumps, that, and we all know this is the way the business works because the vested interest and all this stuff, they're looking to make money. That's it. It's all for the money. So, it's like, oh, well, that heat pump's 8 years old. We can't get parts for that anymore. So I think we have to be vigilant that whatever we do has a long game to it. That's all I'm saying. And open to the fact that times are changing. We don't have time to debate it here, but I see that, we have, it's obviously about the money. It's obviously about the big interest groups because we have Chinese cars that cost pittance by comparison that would serve, especially in urban areas. But oh no, we have to put huge tariffs on them so we can protect our billionaires and their investments. When you think about it, it's one of those situations where I don't understand where failure to plan on your part now constitutes a crisis on our part. The Chinese were way ahead of us in their vision of the future, where we were just lagging behind, and now we have to catch up by making people pay more for stuff. So, a lot of this technology is coming out of China. Solar panels. They're going to be so cheap, we're going to be able to put them on our roofs or whatever. But no, we're going to have to charge a tax on them. So, either you're serious about climate change or it's just another venture opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Grieve. And just scanning the policy myself, I don't see any mention of grid in it. So thanks for that update, Michael. And if anyone else finds it in there, let me know. Any other questions at all for Michael before we accept receipt? Okay, so we have a motion for receipt on the table. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. So that is moved by Director Hillian and seconded by Director Morin. Any discussion on the recommendation? And the recommendation, I should probably say, is that the green building policy presented in the staff report today be approved for the Comox Valley Regional District building projects in line with the corporate energy and emissions plan. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Okay, and with that, we will take a short recess at 6:20. Maybe we could be back here ready to go, fed and caffeinated at 6:40. Thanks. We'll get going again here in about a minute. All right, we'll reconvene the meeting. Thanks everyone for being back so promptly. So next, we are going to talk about the 2025 Unified Alternative Approval Process decisions. And there's a series of recommendations, but first we have a report. So can I get a motion to have receipt of this report? Perfect. Thank you, first and second, and over to CIO Warren.
Thank you very much. And Jake Martins, our General Manager of Corporate Services, will be introducing this report, and then we'll be able to provide any support to the discussion that might follow. So Jake, over to you.
Thank you, James, and through the chair. Over the past year, the board has advanced a number of strategic initiatives that will ultimately require legislative approval, elector approval in order to implement. These initiatives include the Union Bay Fire Protection Service Loan Authorization Bylaw in order to construct a new fire hall, the Comox Valley Transit Service Establishment Bylaw Amendment in order to create a transportation service, the Comox Valley Track and Field Service Loan Authorization Bylaw to construct a new turf field, the Emergency Shelter and Supportive Housing Land Acquisition Service Amendment, and the Homelessness Support Service Amendment, both tied to supporting supportive housing, or excuse me, affordable housing in the community and addressing homelessness. So with 3 readings of each of these bylaws and approval by now the Inspector of Municipalities, the board has to confirm a number of process details related with seeking elector approval. To support public awareness and transparency, as well as promote the more efficient use of resources, the CVRDs typically try to bundle their AAPs together in which to achieve those objectives and to generally provide greater awareness, as it was mentioned earlier in the delegation. That can sometimes be a concern. So the items that the board needs to confirm at this moment are the form to be utilized for the elector responses, a fair determination of the eligible electors to which each of these AAPs would apply, the synopsis of each of the bylaws for notice purposes, and establishing the deadline for receiving elector responses. Those details, with the exception of the deadline date, are all detailed in the attached appendices to this report for your consideration. The AAP response period is proposed to run from January the 15th to February the 18th, 2025. This would, of course, be supplemented by notices in the paper, by an open house for the public to attend, and as well as a broad range of other communication efforts to raise that awareness. Also presented for the board's consideration tonight is a AAP, or Alternative Approval Process Policy. The policy addresses the few items that are not addressed in legislation regarding the procedures and processes to conduct an AAP. And sort of central to this policy is the receipt of electronic elector response forms and the methods by which those will be approved. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'm pleased to answer any questions regarding the AAP process details or other matters.
Great, thank you, Jake. And so just to map out what we're going to do here as a group is we're going to have a discussion, ask any questions of Jake and staff that we might have. Then we'll vote on receipt. Then we'll have a recommendation number 1 that is addressing the policy, and we'll vote on that. If that passes, then we'll actually skip down to recommendation number 3 and discuss recommendations 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 separately. and have a discussion about each of those. And then we'll come back to recommendation number 2, which deals with the timing of the AAP process. But we're going to open it up for the broader discussion about all the various elements and the report at this time. So with that, I'll turn things over to Director Arbour.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Jake, and the staff for preparing all these reports and lining them up for a unified AAP. I think that is a very valid effort, and combining all these different offers is not something that we should take for granted. I think a lot of work has gone into lining all this up. My question is more for other board members and maybe specific members. I'm definitely a vocal champion of 2 of the 4 AAPs. No surprise, the Union Bay one, and I have told the community at a town hall and on Facebook that if the AAP fails, we'll go straight to referendum. So I'll look for support from the board if that one fails at AAP. And the other one I care about, which was a topic of the delegation earlier, is around the housing service. But to be a strong champion, I think we need to go and to put forward these AAPs to voters. I think we have to have some confidence on what we are putting to voters. And at the last meeting, there was requests to send back the proposal to municipalities, and my understanding is at the town of Comox, they might be heading into a different direction, or at least considering. So I'm wondering if you could just have a status update, because I just want to be able, if all these motions pass today, to tell my residents whether Comox is in or out of or whether they're going to trigger a service review or anything like that that could muddy the waters around this particular service. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thanks, Director Arbour, and I'll turn it over to CEO Warren for some comments.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the question. You're right. We're in the midst of presentations right now to the councils. Last Wednesday, I presented to the Town of Comox Council. Last night, I presented to the Village of Cumberland, and tomorrow night, I'll be presenting to the City of Courtenay. And the intent there was to provide some context and background to the unified AAP questions, in particular for both housing and transportation. And to speak to the background research that's been undertaken, the position the board has taken with respect to creating a vehicle for these 2 initiatives to progress and proceed, and then understanding presenting the AAP itself, the elector approval process, as well as some of the financial considerations. No decisions at either presentation last Wednesday or last night, and nor would I expect any. It was really just a presentation for information. I will say that there was some comments at the Town of Comox Council presentation in particular around governance and around the costs of the service and the business plan and some of the details still to be worked out. And there was some reference to potentially a service review that would be a decision that the Town of Comox may make in the future. But like I say, there was no decisions made at the time. Last night at Village of Cumberland Council, similar questions on governance, on business case, on the role of a housing corporation, and but certainly no other commentary around the future of the program. So, and tomorrow night will be City of Courtenay presentation.
And perhaps with some further comment on this, we have Director Grant from Comox.
Yeah, thanks. No, James came and gave us that presentation. We weren't able to vote on it that night because you had to get 100% in order to bring that up and vote on it. So it'll be coming back in early January to our council. I would suspect at that time that we will likely be pulling out, although I don't know for sure. But most of the comments were not happy with this and the way it was going. So that's just my speculation. Until we get to the vote, I won't know for sure.
Sure, Director Arbour. Director Arbour, I assume it's on the same topic, so you want to just. Oh, okay, that's nice of him.
Yeah, positive feedback from Cumberland Council. No concerns raised there on either service.
Great, thank you. Director Arbour.
So to staff, should the town of Comox trigger a service review in January, what would it mean in the context of the AP? The figures we are presenting to the public assume participation of and contribution from the town of Comox in a proportion amount. So I guess at the minimum, it would change or elevate the number that we would put as the maximum acquisition per household, so to speak. But I don't know if staff, if it just happened 2 days ago, maybe you don't fully know the implications to the AP process, but if you're able to explain whether it creates any, at least legislative problems in terms of putting the AP out.
I think the service reviews typically will investigate a particular aspect of a service and try to understand, based on analysis and data, the impact of those concerns. And then there may be some resolution to those concerns. And I wouldn't want to presume or presuppose an outcome of a service review. But I know there's the few that I have had experience with, it's a variety of changes and a variety of impacts. So I don't think it's I don't think it's fair to say there's a blanket statement that other parties would be necessarily increased, their requisitions would be increased to account for the removal or reduction of one party. That could be an outcome, but it could be that the service bylaw is directed to keep all parties at a similar level, which I suppose would mean a reduction overall to account for the removal of one party. But I don't want to presuppose any kind of outcomes or what the analysis might either be requested, and then what the analysis might report on, and what the decision would be by the service review committee, if there was one, to proceed.
Maybe I'll just provide some context from my own perspective. Yeah, I mean, we had a great discussion, Comox Council. There is a varying opinion around the Comox Council table on path forward. You know, for those of you around this table or those watching online know, myself personally, I'm very committed to Service 450, and I also wish we were also in 451, the homelessness support service. But I do recognize that it's a, split decision on Comox Council, and in Mayor Minion's wisdom to send both Councillor Grant and I to the CBRD to represent Comox. We have two different views on this, and bringing both views that are in our community, because we do hear both sides of this. So it's a great discussion we're having around that table, as well as this table. And with that, I'll turn to my Comox colleague for some further comments.
Just wondering if a solution here wouldn't be to, instead of taking everything and moving it from one system to another, basically forcing us in, why wouldn't you just leave it the way it is and come and ask us if we want in? Would that not make way more sense?
CEO Warren, is that something you would like to answer from a staff perspective, or is that more of a rhetorical that?
I think that the board in October, at its meeting in early October, when it was presented with the direct actions report, the board opted at that point to look at Service 450 and 451 and proceed with the regional housing service in that regard.
Director Hardy.
Yeah, thanks. Based upon the discussion, I'm just wondering if recommendation number 7 is something that we should vote on tonight, or maybe defer number 7 till January, as to such times the town of Comox can come back and say whether they're going to be in or not.
Sure, I think that might trigger a timing issue, but again, I'll maybe go to Jake to answer that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so recommendation number 7 concerns bylaw A51, which is the homelessness support service. So Comox does not participate in that service. So it's likely that that references maybe to recommendation number 6, which concerns that emergency shelter and supportive housing land acquisition. And it would create a timing issue if we were to pull that out. AAPs can be conducted individually. That's at the board's discretion, but we have clearly made an intention here to try and group them together for all the reasons noted earlier.
Okay, thank you. Back to Director Arbor.
Yeah, so I think staff have done the best they can in explaining our pickle. So it's just whether for the rest of the board or individually, we're comfortable with moving with an AP with that uncertainty about the participation of one jurisdiction. And I've mulled on that probably even before the discussion at Comox this week. And as I explained when Bill, Comox Valley was here, you know, I think my residents, even though we realize that there's still a risk that, and in fact, I don't know, right? It's a bit of faith in Courtney because we don't have all the details. I can't assure my residents that Denman will be supported or that there will be projects in Area A, right? But for 6 years, I've said this is for the greater good of the region. Housing is a regional priority, and this is one tool that we can push forward, right? So that risk has always been there, whether Comox is in or not. So, so I'm still willing to proceed with this service and enhancing it to give us the tool that the region we've been told and that we've analyzed and researched. And as Rick Fisher, it was great to have a constituent there today offering his perspective. It's not going to solve all the problems, but we know it's going to elevate the work we've done with the coalition and build internal capacity to be a more impactful player in the space. And for the town of Comox, you know, my own feedback, you know, is yeah, I think they're missing information or they're missing the plot a little bit, because one of the tools that I've heard Comox be proud of the last couple of years was they were going to do deals to get some units and buildings, right? And from my understanding, a lot of these deals are disappearing with the change in regulation and the elimination of amenities by the province. So basically, in a couple of years, Comox, when you face your resident at election time, you know, you'll have a group that basically said we're exiting the housing space, right? And I think that's just a bad political move, but I come from a certain perspective on it. You know, maybe Comox is more like Oak Bay or something. I don't know, right? We just want everything to stay the same. And we heard a developer say that Comox was not doing enough in allowing development. So, you know, that's for the calculus of those councillors in Comox that don't want to push ahead. But for me to face my public at the next election, I want to say we are doing everything we can on housing. And I think that this effort is going to position us better to have better resources to move forward. Thanks.
Oh, sorry, there we go. Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not sure whether this is the best time to say this, but it does relate to the issue of the Housing Corporation and a comment that was made by the delegation earlier tonight that Courtney has banned micro units. So I just want to clarify for the record that that's not the case. Courtney has not banned micro units in multi-residential buildings. In fact, one of the members of the delegation who did not speak has built such a building adjacent to the Thrifty's food store in the last couple of years. So I believe there was some, there may have been, the speaker may have been referring to the minimum unit size for a secondary suite or an accessory dwelling unit. But that's something that our planning staff will in fact correct, I believe, by making a statement about it at our own council meeting. And I didn't say anything about it before because I wasn't 100% clear on the details, but I wanted to get that on the record so that in case anybody who's watching is perhaps confused about that. Thanks.
Great, thank you for that clarification. Okay, so any other comments or questions for staff on this report? Okay, we have a motion for receipt on the table. Anyone opposed to receipt? Motion passes. Okay, so we have a series of recommendations. We'll deal with recommendation number 1 first. That is that policy number 104, the alternative approval process policy attached to the previous report, dated December 6th, 2024 as Appendix A be approved. So that's Hillian and Arbor. And any discussion on recommendation number 1? All those in favor? All those opposed? Okay. So let's just do that again. All those in favor? Opposed? And motion passes. Okay, great. So then we're going to come back to number 2. So let's deal with number 3. Recommendation number 3 is dealing with bylaw number 844, the Union Bay Fire Protection Service Loan Authorization bylaw. And that's outlined in Appendix B of the report. Moved enthusiastically, okay, and seconded. Okay, any discussion on the Union Bay Fire Protection piece of this AEP process? Okay, we have a comment from Area A Director Arbor.
Thanks. There's always residents watching, at least a couple. But no, it's interesting because you can tell for the rest of the board, this is a pretty small service area, but with a pretty meaningful project. And we're bringing significant grants to it. But 104 electors could defeat this bylaw in Union Bay. And Union Bay is a very lively community. So, you know, we'll see how it goes, but I'll be happy to continue to champion the project through to February 28th. And again, I've said it and I'll keep saying it so it's clear. If this failed, I will go to referendum. Thank you.
Great. And Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair. I want to heartily endorse this project. Courtney has a particular interest in this as we also are planning to build a new fire hall in the next few years. And we're hoping that Union Bay will pave the way by showing us how it's done.
All right. Any further discussion on recommendation number 3? All those in favor? Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Okay, recommendation number 4 is dealing with bylaw number 848, and that's the Comox Valley Track and Fields Service Loan Authorization, bylaw 848. So that was McCollum and Hillian. Any discussion on recommendation number 4? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Recommendation number 5 is bylaw 849. That's the Comox Valley Transit Service Local Service Establishment bylaw. And anybody like to move that? Okay, Brown and Arbor. And we have a comment from, sorry, Director McCollum, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a lot of discussion on this, and my thoughts on how we're proceeding has changed over the course of the last couple months. And I'm quite concerned about really putting a new level of political risk into what is right now a really great transit system that provides a critical purpose in our community. And, you know, we all know that active transportation infrastructure is just politically so much more divisive than providing busing in a community. And, you know, we can't have a, you know, thinking out 3-4 years from now when a project comes to the table to be contemplated and there's people at the table that are not in agreement with regional benefit. We could be talking about a service review for, we don't do a subservice review. And I think if we really want to bring in active transportation as something that we do regionally, we need to do it thoughtfully, and we need to take the time to figure out exactly what that looks like. And I am just not comfortable going down this road. It will bring us into potentially having to do an amendment to the maximum requisition when we're looking at building a new place to provide busing, and we're just adding additional costs. And yeah, just I think there's going to be some potential pitfalls there. So I'm not in favor of this recommendation. I just wanted to explain my thinking on that. Thanks.
Thank you for those thoughtful comments, Director McCollum. Back to Director Harper.
Yeah, thanks. I was gonna vote in favor, but now the dominoes fall. So, you know, for different reasons in my case. I think at the last meeting, and I spoke passionately, and maybe I crossed some lines around some things I said. I heard Dr. Hillian apologize earlier, and probably I can't remember everything I said, but I'm sure there's an apology in there around some of the tone I had. But it was my frustration to see at the 11th hour, because when I look at the regional parks service, what brought us together, all of us, was a tangible project like Stoughton, right? And so let's be clear about that. That's why everybody bought in, right? Even though it's marginal benefits to some, but we could all see the regional value. And I thought we could all see we could anchor a project like this. So when I talked to my residents the last 3 months, I brought up the Cumberland to Courtney Trail, that we were advancing this project and it's good for the region, as I did with Stoughton. And when that one fell, it becomes a clunky service to me, right? So I was going to still go along a little bit because I believe in long term. I don't see the same level of risk as Dr. McCollum, because we'll still vote on every decision. I mean, yeah, and I'm not, you know, it takes a bit of gall to trigger a service review. I'm not doing it with the artificial turf, but I've had many sleepless nights thinking about doing it, right? So, yeah, so I think that's a bit, so for me, my reason is I can't champion, I don't know what to champion anymore. If the key project or initiatives that had galvanized our interests around a service is pulled out by one of the principal beneficiary, the city of Courtney, then I'm like, why are we doing this? Like, what do I tell them? Oh yeah, we're not doing Cumberland and Courtney. So why are you doing this service? Future opportunities. It kind of falls apart. So I would be happy to support Dr. McCollum and actually parking this one until we gain more clarity. And again, all roads lead to Courtney. So if it's just unless the other 3 Courtney directors come in and say, let's do this, you could sway my vote again, right? But without, all roads lead to Courtney. So if Courtney is not feeling comfortable, why are we doing this? Yeah, thanks.
If I could just get a clarification from staff, at the last meeting, the Courtney Cumberland Connector project at large was not voted against. It was applying for a grant for the initial phase. So the Courtney Cumberland Connector project is not dead. It's alive, but just hasn't been, the next domino hasn't fallen. Is that correct, CEO Warren?
Yeah, the recommendation and the report was about the grant application, and that was not supported at the last board meeting. The board did then speak about the regional service framework that would be supporting this this regional transportation service if it were to be formed. So the Courtney Cumberland Connector project, it did not get the board support for the grant application. We'll have to come back to you in terms of that as a priority and that as a project, with or without a regional transportation service as the vehicle to advance this. I will say also there's other elements of the regional transportation service that we've talked about previously that do still have, I believe, merit in terms of needing a place to be, needing a service to operate within. It's not something we've had before, and as we've discussed with the board previously, this recommended approach was the way to give a formal place for those activities.
Okay, thank you. Director Brown.
Yeah, I guess I'm looking forward to hearing from other directors as well. I feel like the project did die. If we can't agree that applying for $1 million grant to get us through the most difficult portion of a project that could potentially just stop there can't pass, then really why? I mean, just like Director Arbor said, why are we trying to do this? I'm not sure what the purpose is anymore.
Director Grant.
Yeah, in my opinion, what we're trying to do here is mix apples and oranges. I think you've got 2 completely different services. You're trying to put them into one so that you can take money out of it, but it doesn't make sense to me to do that. I don't know why we wouldn't just start a new service and then decide how we want that to do. I think we've got this a little bit backwards.
Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair. So although I parted ways with my three colleagues at the last meeting and voted in favor of the project or of applying for the grant, I will vote against this tonight. I think that enough questions have been raised that if we do this, we want to get it right. I remain 100% in favor of establishing a proper corridor between the communities, but the current cost and you know the initial project have raised so many questions that I don't think that we're in a solid position with this tonight, and I think it's better to go back to the drawing board so that we can figure out a way to get it right. Thank you.
Director Morin.
I thought you were going to speak. Yeah, I mean, I think going back, I mean, we don't want to rehash all the other conversation, but I think there were too many yeah, I guess Director Hillian always says things so much more eloquently, but I just believe that there's more work to be done before we look at this, and combining the two. I think there are some questions, financial questions, et cetera, that need to be sorted out. And again, I don't think in terms of the project, whatever project it would be, I think we are supporting active transportation, but I think we need to do more homework on what that all actually looks like. So that's where I'm at. Thanks.
Okay, any further comments or questions? Okay, so we'll probably need to poll the group here for this vote. So for recommendation, oh, and it's a weighted vote?
No.
No, okay. Just gotcha. Okay, so I'm gonna just read out names then, just for this vote. So Director Arbor. He's opposed. Director Hardy. Yes. Opposed. Director Grieve.
I'm ambivalent on this one. It doesn't affect me, but I guess if I don't vote, I'll be in favor.
Okay, in favor. Director Grant. Opposed. Myself, Director Kerr, I'm in favor. Director Cole Hamilton. You able to unmute yourself? We'll keep going, come back anytime. Director Hillian. Opposed. Director McCollum. Opposed. Director Morin. Opposed. And Director Brown. Opposed. Okay, it's defeated. We don't need Director Cole Hamilton's vote. Thank you for enduring that. And Director Arbor would like to say something.
Because I'm sure Scott Stanfield is at least watching us. Yeah,
Yes.
we'd get some coverage there if he was still around. This is but we won't get. I don't know where the record is, but what I would pass on as a message is, yeah, for me, this effort is dead, but it doesn't mean that I look for opportunities for collaboration outside of a service. So I've got huge commitment to try to connect the Royston Seaside Trail to the Riverside Trail. And I have huge commitment with Dr. Brown to do something around Royston Road long term. But I don't believe I think we might have to create something at the EAs to facilitate for our staff to assist the EAs, because in the municipalities, you have the tools you need. But I'm not going to pursue in this term another regional service effort on this. I will look at options and ask our staff to look at options for the EAs to work better with the ministry and have a better framework for us to maybe able to resource that work and to collaborate with Dr. Brown around Dunsmuir and Royston Road. Thanks.
Maybe I'll just ask CAO Warren if he could just enlighten us on kind of next steps on our active transportation. There seems to be support for active transportation and a regional approach in general, but maybe not quite a specific way. So what's the path forward?
I think I'd like to take a little bit of time and be able to formulate some ideas on how to respond to active transportation in that regional sense. I think there are still electoral area focused projects within the active transportation network plan. But we will have to come back to you in due course, whether it's through the electoral area service committee or the board, or in both formats, more than likely. You've got some really good planning documents. You've got a potential for a framework. There is interest I do hear around the board table. I think it's just the means in which we get to that point. So I think we'll take a little bit of time and try to understand what that path forward might be, and report back in due course. May or may not be tied into the financial plan, because of course we don't have a dedicated home for this. But yeah, you can leave that with us, and it's on the radar.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, if you thought, Director Warren, please.
Thanks, Vice Chair. Yeah, and again, we've had the conversation. I don't have my notes in front of me from that conversation of sort of the rationale behind why I voted the way I did. But there were some elements of the original plan that didn't come to fruition when the plan was presented by staff around the connector, and that's why I voted against it. So I think at some point where we have that conversation, I don't know, but in terms of sort of the process of how we came to that, I think would be important for us to have that board discussion so that we don't muddy the waters next time. And again, I don't have my notes in front of me, and it's not really the time to talk about it, but I think we need to have a discussion about the process and how we got to that place of that very awkward decision. And how we can, and part of it was having 20,000 meetings and 18,000 pages of reading in 1 week. But I think that conversation needs to happen. So I'm hoping that will be part of what comes forward. Thanks.
Great. All right, we're going to leave transit. And if you thought that was fun, the next one should be even more fun. So let's do recommendation number 6, and that is related to bylaw 850, the emergency shelter and supportive housing land acquisition service establishment. Moved by Arbor, seconded by Hillian, and for discussion. Director Hillian beat you, Director Hardy. Go ahead, Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair. I think the presentation by the builders delegation tonight was useful. I think the idea of us sitting down with the builders of the community is a really good idea. I think it was notable that there was no mention of the fact that there was not a rental building constructed in the city of Courtenay for some 20 years, up until I think it was about 2017 or 18. Most of what was being built was condos. That was what the market was demanding, and that's what got built. A lot of those condos were purchased as speculative units. And that was part of the reason that the cost of rentals went up. That was also part of the reason why the government that took office around that time started implementing measures that would change that situation. Thankfully, that situation has changed, and now we've had a very significant number of apartments built in the city of Courtenay, if not elsewhere. But the problem remains that the private market has not, in fact, addressed the need for social housing. And that's been the primary issue in this community for a number of years. It was discussed at our strategic planning process, and the Housing Corporation was one tool that we came up with as an option for getting something done on a bigger scale with our nonprofits than they've been able to do thus far. And I think on that basis, and given the amount of work that staff have put into this, that we should give it a try. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Director Hardy.
Yeah, I'm still struggling with the town of Comox and where they are with regards to this particular bylaw, and then moving forward, if there's going to be a service review, what transpires after that. I really struggle with recommendation number 6 right now, and I won't be able to support it until such time as I know what's going on with the town of Comox.
Director Morin.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm in support of this regardless of what happens, because as I've said numerous times, housing has been the #1 issue. And in fact, in an email that we received today from one of the presenters, they made that point as well, that housing is more prominent than crime and any other issue in this community of concern. So while we may disagree on how to try to solve that problem, I still think that we need to devote the time into taking a look at how we can move the dial on that. And as I mentioned to the delegation, that can look a variety of ways. That can look at us being quite hands-off. It can look, you know, very tailored to our community. So I think we need to proceed. And I didn't hear a compelling reason not to go forward from the delegation. Actually, I made a point of asking the question for something really specific and compelling, and I didn't hear it. So I'd like to continue on this path. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll just go again. I just want to show a bit of empathy for my fellow director from Area B. Because if I was sitting there as director of Area B, it's a bit bizarre if you end up in the service and you know not a project is going to get built in Area B, but you have this super long boundary with Comox, and you'll be paying into this service, and your immediate neighbor, which is much bigger, won't. That's kind of wrong, but Comox will stand out if they actually pull the plug on this in a big way. So I'm hoping that you can live with that dilemma. I understand you may not be able to vote in favor. I'm just worried as to whether you would see yourself leaving the service as well. Then that would be new concerns. But I'm just I don't know if you've thought that far, but I'm hoping we'll proceed with a vote, and I'll vote in favor tonight. But yeah, that's me. That's my comments.
Director Grieve, please go ahead.
Oh, once again, the historical perspective. I was sitting on a brand newly minted regional district board, recently cut loose from the northern neighbor, and this discussion at the table was around emergency shelter, and at the time, the provincial government was offering money to build emergency shelters as long as the local government supplied the land. And in the space of less than 15 minutes, the whole board came together unanimously and approved this service. So I don't think we should let it slip away. It's morphing into something a little different, but it's still within the basic parameters of the original vision. Like I say, even Denman and Hornby pay into this. So it was one of those magnanimous moments when we all came together. So I think I'm obligated to keep it going. I'm obligated to support it. As far as the finer points and where it's going to lead, I don't think that's really material. Material is we've got a service that we all agreed on, where we all pay in per capita. I think it's very precious. It's part of the fabric of the history of the Comox Valley Regional District, so I will support it.
Director Brown.
Thanks, Chair, Vice Chair. Yeah, I absolutely support this. we all know that housing is the biggest issue in our communities. It's not just housing, it's affordable housing that is the biggest issue in our communities. We see the distress that it causes not only the people who are underhoused and unhoused, but also the people who are living amongst them. And I think obviously it would be ideal for all of us in the region to be contributing and united on this front. And I also understand that it's a tough place to get to at times. But this really does hit every one of our strategic drivers, and so I'm happy to support it.
Did you have another comment, Director Brown? Okay. No problem. Okay, so maybe I'll make a comment while in voting in favor of this. Again, this is with my director hat on, not my chair hat tonight. Yeah, as was said, housing is the number one issue. Affordability and housing affordability, and they go together. The biggest gap in our housing needs assessment was non-market rental housing, 2,500 units today, 4,000 units very soon. And developers, as has been said, have been building lots of housing, and we thank them for that, but not this specific niche area because it wasn't profitable. So of course they wouldn't build it. And nonprofits have tried to build and have built, I think it was 350 plus units over the last 5 or 6 years locally. But again, not enough to meet this gap. We also hear from the business community, and specifically our downtown Comox BIA, that they can't find staff to work in their shops. They can't find enough baristas to serve us coffee, and landscapers and other trades. They can't, they don't have enough workers that can afford to live here and service those industries. So again, I wish we were in Homelessness Service 451, although as has been said at prior meetings, Comox does something a little bit different. We have an affordable housing contribution policy, and we get cash or units from developers for affordable units. And as was said by Director Arbour, that might be changing under the new rules of Bill 44. But this affordable housing service and this focus on a housing corporation on non-market housing is rental housing specifically is really important to me. I'm very passionate about this. I think it would be a big mistake if Comox were to pull out of the service. That's my own personal view. That does not speak for the rest of council. It would, to me, say to the community that Comox does not care about affordable housing. We do not wish to be a part of a regional approach to affordable housing. I think that sends a very wrong message to the people of Comox, to the people of Comox Valley. So I'll be working very hard with my fellow councillors to talk with them about this, express my feelings on this, express what I think many in the community, feel about this. And if, yes, taxes may go up and would go up because of this, but again, for those of us, especially in the town of Comox, which is maybe a more affluent community than many in Canada, giving a little bit more so everyone in our community has a roof over their head is something that is our duty to do as citizens. So again, I'll be supporting this, and I hope the vote passes tonight. Okay, any other comments? With my chair hat back on. Yes, please, Director Grieve, go ahead.
To be perfectly clear, we are all part of this service. At this
currently we are.
Currently we are. So I think it would be it would take an extraordinary effort to break it up. I mean, if you talk about a service review and all that kind of stuff, well, that may or may not happen. What we have here is the one and only service that addresses this issue that we all pay into. So there's no way you should not support this, in my view. Thank you.
Any further comments? Okay, I think we will do a roll call vote on this one as well. Lisa, does that make sense? Perfect. Okay, so I'll go from the top again, starting with Area A, Director Arbour. In favor. Area B, Director Hardy. Oh, you want to?
Yeah, like I said, I'm really struggling with the town Comox.
So sorry, Director Hardy, we're taking a vote right now.
I know.
Okay.
My rationale for my vote. I'm still really struggling with the town of Comox, but I will vote in favor of this recommendation.
Thank you, Director Hardy. Area C, Director Grieve?
In favor.
In favor. Director Grant? Opposed? Myself, I'm in favor. Director Cole Hamilton? Okay. Director Hillian? Director McCollum? In favor. So Director Hillian and McCollum are in favor. Director Moran? In favor. Director Brown? Okay, that motion carries. Okay, so let's move along. Okay, flipping over the page, we are now on recommendation number 7. Okay, so this is bylaw number 851, and this is the Comox Valley Homelessness Support Service Establishment bylaw. Just gonna have a mover and a seconder. And can I just get clarification that this is a vote for everyone? Okay, this is a vote for all parties. Okay, any discussion? Just give another 5 seconds here. No one has any last minute comments. Okay, so all those in favor? All those opposed? I know it still votes for this, yeah. So 1 opposed? Okay. And great. So now I think that carries. We can go back to number 2. Recommendation number 2, and that is to deal with the actual date. So, sure. So let's, thanks Lisa for doing this. So we're going to remove the 3rd bullet, which is 849, bylaw number 849, the Comox Valley Transit Service. But otherwise, recommendation 2 is as follows in the agenda, that in accordance with section 86(3) of the community charter, that we set February 18th, 2025 at 4:30 p.m. And that's the deadline by which elector responses must be submitted for the alternative approval process for the following bylaws: 844, 848, 850, and 851. Moved by Hillian, seconded by Arbor. Any discussion? Director Moran, please go ahead.
Thanks, Vice Chair. I know Jake has outlined things, but I'm just wondering if you could go over the process if this is approved in terms of what the public notification process is and timelines, et cetera, because of the concerns about the AAP. I thought it would be good to just clarify all of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so the legislation requires 2 statutory public notices that are put forward in consecutive weeks prior to the start of the response period. Of course, we've gone traditionally, and we'll again be going past that with both print advertisements in the paper, both promoting the open house and the AAP overall, as well as radio and online advertisements as well. So we feel we've got good coverage to raise general awareness amongst the public. As certainly as was noted by the delegation today, there is some criticism of AAPs by local governments when it's felt that there's not sufficient advertising, that the 2 statutory notices are not sufficient in some views. So we're certainly going beyond that and look forward to raising this widely amongst the general public.
Right, thank you. So to clarify, we are going beyond what's legislated.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Director Hillian?
Thanks, Chair. Just for the record, there's been criticism of the alternate approval process. It's a totally legitimate process. It's provided for in legislation, and in my view, it's an appropriate tool of governing. All of the issues that we're going forward with here are things that myself and I know a number of colleagues talked about when we were elected to the positions that we now serve. If people don't like them, they certainly have a vehicle for dealing with that when the next election rolls around. That obviously goes without saying. But I think that we would, were we to go to referendum, despite the public mood right now, I think we could actually make an argument for many of these things. But it's a costly process that delays needed services and processes. And so I'm 100% comfortable with us proceeding in this manner. Thank you.
Great. Any further discussion? So again, this is a vote to set February 18th at 4:30 PM as the deadline for the AEP process. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? Dr. Grant opposed, just one, and motion passes. Okay. Right, moving on. Thanks everyone for that, and thank you, Jake and staff, for leading us through that process. All right, so that was a motion by Arbor to move the parcel tax roll review panel report 2025 and over to CA Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Kelly Broughton, our Manager of Financial Planning, will be introducing this report and I believe the next report also. So Kelly, over to you on the parcel tax roll review panel.
Thanks, James. Through the CAO to the directors. Staff are here to request that the board approve the parcel tax review panel to authenticate the 2025 parcel and frontage tax rolls to be held on February 19th, 2025. Currently, the CBRD has parcel taxes for 6 local water services, 3 liquid waste services, and 1 park service. Section 204 of the Community Charter requires that parcel tax review panel to address complaints and authenticate the roll before parcel tax is imposed for the first time. Typically, the panel is appointed in December of the current year, with the meeting set for February of the next year. The panel members consist of the Comox Valley Regional District electoral areas A, B, and C, along with the Strathcona Regional Electoral Area D Director. If there are no public objections received 48 hours before the meeting, or if there are no new parcel taxes, the meeting may be canceled. As the Graham Lake Water Service local area is a new parcel tax for the CDRD, the parcel tax should proceed as required under the legislation. Staff will provide the completed roll information to the public through the website and the main CVRD office, along with direct communication to the affected property owners. During the 2025 to 29 financial planning process and presentations, any adjustments needed to the current parcel or frontage taxes will be highlighted, and the appropriate bylaw updates will be brought forward for consideration. Thank you, and staff are available for questions.
All right, any questions? Thanks, Kelly. Okay. So we'll vote on receipt. Anyone approve? Anyone opposed? Sorry. Anyone approve? Perfect. That passes. Can I have someone move the recommendation? Hillian and Grieve. Any discussion? Anyone opposed? Motion passes. Great. And on to 7. Yes, thank you. Grieve moved receipt of the next report. And again, I believe that's over to Kelly.
Thank you. And thank you through the CAO to the directors. During the 2024 to 28 financial plan adoption, interim financing was identified as a source of funding for 5 capital projects. Staff are seeking a board resolution to enable the applications for the interim financing through the municipal financing authorities liability and agreement process. Under the local government section 403, paragraph 1A and section 175, paragraph 1 of the community charter, interim financing is a permitted source of funding. The capital projects utilizing the funding are captured under 5 electoral area services. Denman Island Fire for a maximum loan of $550,000 for a fire engine tanker truck. Hornby Island Fire for a maximum loan amount of $175,000 for a fire engine tanker truck. Black Creek Oyster Bay Fire for a maximum loan of $450,000 for a fire engine. And the Hornby Island Community Parks for a maximum loan of $150,000 for the shingle spit boat ramp. The 5th loan was for the King Coho sewer system. However, at the December 9th, 2024 electoral area services meeting, a budget amendment to reallocate the funding source from short-term debt to community works funds was approved. Due to this amendment, although the King Coho project is included in the resolution, the application to MFA will not proceed. It is also a requirement that repayment of the principal and interest calculations are included within each service's financial plan. The 2024 to 2028 financial plan has met this requirement. The individual loans must be paid off in full within 5 years of the first drawdown, and the funds will not be drawn on until the projects are nearing completion. To date, only 2 of the loans, the Denman Island Fire and Black Creek Oyster Bay Fire, will be drawn down before December 31st. and staff will only draw what is actually necessary to fund the purchase. Thank you, and staff are available to answer any questions.
Right, any questions? Yes, Director Morin.
Thank you. Just a quick question. Why the discrepancy in the cost for the Denman tanker truck and the Hornby? Why is one 550 and one's 175? Is that just is there more reserves or something somewhere to draw on, or?
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at the, if I can just grab my.
It's not that important. But
I think there's other sources of funding for the.
Yeah,
Hornby
there's a
Island
little
one.
bit more funding. Yeah. Thank you.
And I think the Hornby Island one could be a used truck as well. Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, we'll vote on receipt. Anyone opposed? Someone like to move the recommendation? Great. Any further discussion? Anyone opposed? And the recommendation passes. Thank you. Thanks, Kelly. Okay, we have some minutes. We have the Recreation Commission minutes of November 26th, moved by Grant, seconded by Warren or Brown. Thank you. Any discussion? Anyone opposed? Minutes are passed. Regional Parks. Okay, perfect. That was Brown and then Grant. Any discussion on the Regional Parks Trail Committee meeting minutes? Okay, anyone opposed? Passes. And electoral area services has been busy. We have a number of recommendations coming up for areas A, B, and C only. So first, recommendation number 1, which is a letter of concurrence for the proposed telecommunications tower on the property, be denied. Moved by Hillian, seconded by Grieve. Any discussion on this? Okay, it's a vote. Yeah, sure. Director Hardy, please go ahead.
Thanks. So it states in the recommendation that a letter of concurrence for the proposed telecommunications towers. Okay, I just seen the bottom part, denied. Yeah, thanks.
Sorry, I said that probably too quietly. Thank you. The key words are the last 2 words of that recommendation. That's great. Okay, any further discussion? Okay, anyone opposed? Motion passes. Recommendation number 2. That is the development variance permit, DV 3A24, be approved. Any discussion on this? Director Grieve, please go ahead.
Just to be absolutely sure, these new charges come into effect after this is adopted, correct? The new charges for CCCs at the point of adoption.
Just to confirm, we're on recommendation 2, which is the development variance permit for the property on Spence Road.
Oh, sorry, I'm ahead of myself.
Hold that, Director Grieve. We'll get to that in a moment. So recommendation 2, any other questions, comments? Okay, anyone opposed? Motion carries. Recommendation number 3, thank you, development variance permit DV 3B24 to increase maximum permitted height of a building on a property. So that is again a vote of the areas. Any conversation, discussion on this? Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Recommendation number 4. And that's a site-specific engineer's prescription for the sitting of an existing dwelling. Any discussion on this? Okay. And anyone opposed? Great, and that motion passes as well. We're on to recommendation number 5. Another engineer prescription. Any discussion on recommendation number 5? Okay, and anyone opposed? Motion passes. Recommendation number 6. All right, and that is about a release of a covenant on some titles of land. Any comments or questions about this one? Okay, anyone opposed? Motion passes. Recommendation number 7. This is related to a discharge of an easement. Any conversation? Anyone opposed? And moving along, it passes. Number 8. And this is a staff report be provided to the town of Comox in response to a proposed multi-residential development. And again, this is a vote of the areas. Any conversation? Discussion? Yes, please, Director Hardy.
Yeah, thanks. I know the letter that's going forward to the town of Comox revolves around the CVRD and infrastructure, but there are a couple other items that were put forward yesterday as well. I'm just wondering if those were going to be included in the report. So that's the question I put forward to the CEO. And again, those questions revolve around the green space between Area B and the town of Comox. And then with regards to traffic going through Hector Road and Aston Road, moving forward down the road with regards to constituents in Area B, hoping that flow through traffic going down to Indians Way would not occur in those areas. So I'm just wondering if those comments that we put forward yesterday were going to be included here too. So that's the question, CEO.
Yeah, thanks, Director Hardy. The staff report itself, as you noted, didn't include specific reference to the green space or the traffic considerations, but the topic was raised and I think thoroughly discussed at the EASC. So our cover letter was going to reflect that comment and then include the staff report as the attachment to the cover letter.
Okay. Any further discussion? Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Okay, so that's recommendation number 8. We're now on to section G of the agenda. For those of you following along at home, we're into bylaws and resolution, and we're on to third reading of recommendation for bylaw number 668. Great. So this is the Union Bay Water Local Service Area Development Cost Charges. Any discussion? Anyone opposed? And that motion passes. The next one is for areas C and D, and we have area C director here. Recommendation for bylaw number 841, Black Creek Oyster Bay Water Local Service Area Development Cost Charges. Thank you, Director Grieve. Seconded by Director Grant. Any conversation? Perfect. Wonderful. Okay. Are you opposed, Director Grieve? Sounds like motion passes. Okay, motion passes. Thank you. Okay, and on to adoption of some other items. So number 3 is recommendation for bylaw 834, the Royston Garbage Collection Regulations, Hillian and Grant. Any conversation about this discussion? This is a vote for everyone. Anyone opposed? Motion passes. Number 4, again, a vote for everyone. 840, Union Bay Water Conservation Bylaw. Any discussion about this one? Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Okay, the next one's a vote just for the areas, A, B, and C. 842, Comox Valley Regional District Municipal Ticket Information Bylaw, 104. Thank you, Director Grant. Anyone second? Thank you, Director Morin. Any discussion? Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Number 6, again, a vote for the areas. This is 843, another bylaw adjudication ticketing bylaw, number 679. Perfect. And any discussion? Anyone opposed? Motion carries. All right, number 7, we're getting there. 854, Graham Lake Water Service Parcel Tax Bylaw number 807. And this is a vote for everyone. Would someone move that? Perfect. Any discussion? Anyone opposed? Motion carries. And number 8, 855, Graham Lake Water Local Service Water Tolls Bylaw 826. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Okay, so we have no new business. We do have an addendum upon approval of the board. Right, okay, and in order to consider this is the adoption of a bylaw. We require a 2/3 affirmative vote to add it to the agenda. Is that correct? Majority to add it, 2/3 to adopt. Okay, majority to add, 2/3 to actually adopt it. So can we just have, is anyone opposed to adding this to the agenda? And it has been duly added. So this is recommendation about bylaw 812, Royal Comox Valley Zoning Bylaw 520. So first and second reading has been moved, and this is a vote of the areas only. Any discussion? Anyone opposed? Motion passes. So we move third reading. We have a seconder. Yeah. Director Grieve, thank you. Grant and Grieve. And any discussion on third reading? Anyone opposed? Motion carries. And then moving adoption, Grant, seconded by Grieve, thank you. And again, vote of the areas. Any discussion? Anyone opposed? Perfect. And that is passed. Okay, anything else to add? We're good. So now we're going to move in camera. And oh, please, Director Grieve, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for some assuredness that we're going to be bringing back the presentation we had today from the builders for discussion at the next meeting, like we usually bring back the delegations. And I think that, you know, I'd like to make some kind of or see some kind of staff report on how we could engage with the group and whether or not this is the appropriate time to bring it up. We don't usually bring it up at the meeting, but I think I guess it's, we don't have notice of motions, but just a notice of motion that I think we should, address that at the review at the next meeting.
Thanks for that, Director Grieve. And yeah, on the next agenda will be under business arising, will be reference to the delegation from this evening.
Yeah.
And then any further consideration the board wants to take at that point would
That'll give us time to actually
point of making
formulate
a
some
resolution.
thoughts. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks for that reminder. Okay, motion to go in camera. Perfect. Anyone opposed?